dim the lights. Light a candle or turn on that fan for the perfect sleepy hum. Wherever you are, whether curled up under a blanket in Boston or pretending you're not stuck in traffic in Manila, I want you to pause, breathe, and step into the kind of history they didn't teach you in school. But before we dive into tonight's tale of straw mattresses, snoring goats, and the bedtime rituals of a man named Baldric, I've got a quick favor. If you love falling asleep to the dusty, weird, and mildly tragic bedtime stories of the past, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you? Seeing our little sleepy village stretch across the globe always warms my slightly medieval heart. And don't forget, tomorrow's tale might be even stranger. Now let's begin. Your name is Baldric. You're 41 years old, meaning in medieval terms, you're not old but sore. You live in a one-room home with your wife, Mildred, your 4 children, a goat named Grumble, and a chicken who insists on sleeping exactly where your feet go. Your mattress is a sack of straw that smells like a compost heap. I got emotional. And yet, you sleep like a log that gave up. There are no blackout curtains, no herbal mist, just the sounds of livestock, the smell of damp wool, and the warm, comforting weight of a wool blanket that still remembers the plague. This isn't luxury. This is medieval survival. You don't scroll TikTok until your soul leaves your body. You sleep because the sun is down, the fire is low, and everyone else in the house is slowly becoming your blanket. Tonight, we're unraveling the sleep secrets of peasants who, despite having no privacy, no heating, and a floor made of regret, somehow achieved legendary levels of REM. You'll hear about Baldric's pillow, stuffed with last week's salad, and the mysterious second sleep that sounds made up but wasn't. So, snuggle in. You're about to discover how sleeping next to a farting goat might be the key to proper rest. And trust me, once you hear how Baldric did it, your $2,000 memory foam mattress might start feeling suspiciously underachieving. Your name is Baldric, you're 41 years old, and somehow still alive. That alone deserves a slow clap in medieval times. You've lived through 17 winters, a dozen questionable pottage recipes, and one unfortunate incident involving bees and an outhouse. And tonight, you're doing what you do best, collapsing headfirst into your very average life. Your house, a one-room hut with a roof made of desperate thatch, a floor made of dirt, and walls so thin you can hear your neighbor sneeze from 2 farms over. Luxury is not the word here. The ceiling leaks, the corners grow mushrooms when it rains, and the draft is a constant whisper reminding you that insulation hasn't been invented yet. Inside, the chaos continues. Your wife, Mildred, is snoring gently, one arm wrapped around your youngest child, the other dangerously close to the goat. Grumble, that stubborn goat, is curled at the foot of your sleeping spot, chewing on something that may or may not be your only pair of socks. The chicken, yes, you still let her stay, is nesting right where your feet are supposed to go, radiating heat and mild judgment. You lie on a sack of straw so old it crunches when you breathe. It's tied together with rope and the sheer willpower of every peasant ever laid down on it. And the smell? A delicate bouquet of compost, old sweat, and a faint undertone of panic. But somehow, this is comfort. This is home. And you're tired. So tired your bones feel clocked out 3 hours before you did. Forget memory foam. Forget ergonomic anything. Your bed is whatever's soft enough not to bruise you when you drop onto it like a sack of despair. Some nights you fluff your straw mattress by stomping on it until it stops poking you. Other nights you give up and let the twigs win. Either way, you've never uttered sleep hygiene. That's a modern luxury. You, Baldric, practice sleep desperation. Your pillow? A sack stuffed with things you didn't eat this week. Rags, dried grass, possibly an old cabbage leaf if it's still holding shape. You dream of clouds and accidentally inhale a feather from the chicken's last molt. Your blanket is a slab of wool that weighs as much as a full-grown pig and smells like every winter you've survived, rolled into one fuzzy, slightly damp time capsule. And yet, as you settle in, wrapped in your damp wool burrito of regret, a miracle begins. Your body, which has been in constant labor since, starts to shut down. Your arms ache and your back hums. After walking 10 miles to fetch firewood, your legs scream briefly and then go silent. You don't think about taxes because taxes are paid in wheat and despair. You don't scroll through social media because the only feed you know is the one for your chickens. You don't fall asleep, you descend, you sink into the kind of sleep people write songs about if only they had time between washing their linens in icy rivers and avoiding plague rats. You drool, you snore, you wake up with straw stuck to your face and a chicken foot in your armpit, and yet you feel okay. How? Why? Welcome to the ancient art of peasant sleep. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't curated, it was survival with a side of snoring. And it all started with one crucial principle: exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that comes from a day of hauling buckets, mending roofs, digging ditches, and swearing at livestock. Your body doesn't care about softness or scent when you're that tired. It cares about surrender. Peasant sleep was also strategic. You didn't sleep 8 hours straight like a spoiled house cat. You slept in shifts. First sleep, wakefulness. Second sleep. That odd, mysterious middle period was sacred. People used it to pray, think, whisper secrets, or stare at the hearth like they'd seen too much. Some even used it for a bit of medieval cardio, if you know what I mean. And let's be honest, you probably don't want to. No stress, no anxiety over being awake at 2 a.m. You just lived. You accepted it. The fire crackled, the wind moaned through the holes in your wall, the goat snorted, you scratched your leg until it stopped itching or started bleeding. Either way, it was bedtime progress. And what made all of this truly work? It wasn't just exhaustion. It was the sheer volume of human contact. You didn't sleep alone. Privacy wasn't a concept. You shared warmth, space, and breath with everyone in the house. If you wanted alone time, you got it when you died. Until then, body heat was your heater, blanket, and survival system. It was sweaty. It wasn't quiet. Someone always farted. But it kept you alive. And honestly, being alive in the 14th century, that's winning. Your night wasn't scented with lavender, but with soot, onions, and something unidentifiably damp. Your white noise machine was the rooster rearranging itself on the beam overhead, and your blackout curtains were, surprise, non-existent because light sources cost money, and no one was about to waste a candle just to stay awake longer and ruin their sleep cycle. So yes, Baldric sleeps. He sleeps hard. His neck cricks. His dreams are confusing. He wakes up groggy, itchy, and vaguely insulted by the weather. But he slept. And that, in his world, is a luxury you earn by surviving the day. You, with your melatonin gummies and overpriced linen sheets, may never know the strange peace that comes from collapsing into a sack of hay with a barnyard symphony in your ears. But Baldric, he gets it. He's not well rested. He's not refreshed. But he's alive. And that, my friend, is the most significant bedtime victory. So next time you fluff your pillow and adjust your sound machine, spare a thought for Baldric, 41, perpetually sore and snoring into a chicken. Medieval peasants might have cracked the code first when it comes to raw, primal, accidentally therapeutic sleep. By now, you understand one thing clearly. Baldric doesn't sleep like a prince. He sleeps like a man who spent all day dodging splinters, yelling at livestock, and developing a personal vendetta against gravity. As dawn begins to creep through the cracks in the wall, another harsh reality of medieval life slaps him across the face. Morning. Not the gentle, soft light and birdsong kind of morning you romanticize. No, this is a loud, smelly, why is my leg wet morning. Because remember, Baldric doesn't sleep alone. He shares his space with Mildred, their 4 kids, Grumble the goat, and Frida, the emotionally unstable chicken. Every living thing in the house stirs at once. It's a symphony of bleating, squawking, grumbling stomachs, and children asking questions like, is the roof gonna fall in today? There's no snooze button. The only thing that hits you is the cold. The fire died hours ago, and Baldric could feel the chill in his bones before opening his eyes. His blanket, soaked with the ghost of last winter's storm, offers zero comfort. He shifts to stand and immediately regrets it. The straw mattress gives way with a crunch that suggests at least one beetle didn't survive the night. His back protests. His knees sound like 2 rocks negotiating a truce. But there's no choice. The day doesn't care about your joints. He swings his feet over the edge and lands on a pile of chicken droppings. Again, the floor, if you can call it that, is compacted dirt mixed with last night's mud, some hay, and the occasional footprint from animals who weren't technically invited in. It's less of a floor and more of a constantly evolving science experiment. And it's cold. It's so cold that the walls themselves judge you for still being alive. The wind snakes through the gaps in the thatch, swirling around the room like it's trying to freeze thoughts before they form. Your breath fogs the air. Your toes go numb. You haven't even stood up fully, and already your day is off to a terrible start. Welcome to medieval mornings. Baldric doesn't have running water. He doesn't have indoor plumbing. He has a half-frozen wooden bucket filled with something that might have once been clean water, but is now hosting an ecosystem of its own. He splashes some on his face. It's the kind of cold that makes your ancestors flinch in sympathy. No warm towel, no scented cleanser, just ice, dirt, and a prayer that your eyebrows don't fall off. At this time, hygiene is a concept that's more optional than real. You wash when you have to, and when you do, you use what you have: cold water, a rag, and your emotional resilience. Baldric rubs at his skin until it's red, then calls it clean enough. There's no deodorant, no toothpaste. Maybe you chew on a stick or rub charcoal on your teeth if you're feeling fancy, but you hope your breath doesn't start a fire most days. Mildred wakes next, stretching beside the hearth, pulling the same tunic over her head that she's worn for 2 years. There's no such thing as a wardrobe change. You wear what you have until it either rots or walks away. Baldric follows suit. His clothes are stiff with last week's sweat. His shirt smells faintly of goat and shame. And his shoes, well, he doesn't have any. Most peasants didn't. They walked barefoot through mud, manure, and rocks, sharper than their sense of hope. The house begins to move. Children argue. Grumble stomps across the floor like he pays rent. Frida the chicken attempts a low-level assassination by standing exactly where Baldric needs to step. But still, there's no time to waste. Morning chores await. But first, breakfast. And if you think Baldric is about to enjoy a nice hearty meal, think again. There's no bacon, no pancakes, no freshly ground coffee in an adorable mug. Breakfast is a wooden bowl of despair, better known as pottage. It's not fresh, it's not exciting. It's a thick, gloopy mixture of grains, root vegetables, and sorrow, boiled for days and reheated until it defies texture. Sometimes it has flavor, sometimes it has mold. Most days, it just exists. Bread? Oh yes, a lovely hunk of barley or rye so dense it could be used as a medieval weapon. It's stale, it's gritty, and if you're lucky, it only cracks 1 tooth instead of 2. Sometimes there's sawdust mixed in to bulk it up, sometimes acorns. Either way, it's a culinary insult. To drink? Ale. Weak, flat, lukewarm ale. Why? Because the water is often contaminated. You're more likely to survive by drinking this sad excuse for beer than anything from the well. Even children drink it. No one's happy about it, but no one wants parasites either. Cheers, I guess. There's no table, no chairs. You squat by the fire, bowl in one hand, bread in the other, trying to chew quietly enough not to wake the baby goat or trigger a family-wide existential crisis. And still, this is the good part of the day. This moment, huddled around the ashes of last night's fire, steam rising from your sad stew, is a moment of peace. Fleeting, yes, cold. But peaceful in the way only complete exhaustion and lowered expectations can be. You're alive, you're fed, and you haven't stepped in anything warm yet today. That's a win. Outside, the wind howls, the clouds threaten rain, the fields wait, and Baldric, aching, chilled, and chewing like a man who's lost all hope and flavor, gets ready to face it all. Because that's what medieval mornings demand. Not enthusiasm, not motivation, just sheer, stubborn, goat-scented survival. And so, the day begins. Baldric wipes the last bit of crusted pottage from his beard with the sleeve of his tunic because napkins haven't been invented yet, and rises to face the full force of a medieval morning. His knees crack like someone stepped on a bundle of dry twigs, and he mutters something halfway between a prayer and a complaint. Outside, the wind howls like it lost a bet. The sky is gray, spitting drizzle that promises to get worse before it gets better. And now, it's time to go to work. In medieval Europe, the only thing more certain than taxes was labor. Relentless, back-breaking, soul-squeezing labor. Clocks didn't schedule the life of a peasant. It was dictated by sunlight, weather, and pain. And this morning, the sun is refusing to cooperate. Still hidden behind thick clouds, it peeks out just enough to remind everyone that it's technically daytime. And no, you don't get a break for rain. Baldric sighs and shuffles toward the door, stepping carefully over the goat, 2 sleeping children, and a bucket that may or may not contain last night's emergency bathroom solution. That door, by the way, It creaks like a dying banshee, held together with old rope and the power of denial. He pushes it open and immediately regrets it. The cold slaps him across the face, hard. It's like winter's angry ex showing up uninvited. And yet he keeps walking, because that's the rule. You work or you starve. It's as simple as that. Baldric trudges through the muck, boots soaked through before the first minute passes. The ground is a slushy mix of mud, manure, and rocks that hate your feet. And he's not alone. All around the village, doors creak open and fellow peasants emerge like soggy, shivering ghosts, heading to their corner of medieval suffering. Today, Baldric's job is to help repair a fence, or what passes for one when you have no nails, no proper tools, and 3 goats who think fences are a personal challenge. The posts are rotting, the ropes frayed, and there's a hole so big that even Frida the king escaped through it last week and returned only when she got pecked by a swan. True story. He grabs a shovel or a crooked stick with a flat metal edge tied on with hope and desperation. The handle gives him splinters and the blade is dull enough to qualify as a spoon, but it's all he has. Tools or heirlooms passed down, patched up, and prayed over. And when they break, you adapt or pretend it still works and scream into the wind. As he digs, the rain starts in earnest. Not a gentle drizzle, but a complete medieval soaking. No raincoat, no boots. Just layers of wool now wet enough to gain sentience. Within minutes, he's drenched, muddy, and already regretting not being born as anyone, wealthier. While Baldric is wrestling with mud and livestock, Lord Ethelric is probably sipping warm mead near a roaring fire somewhere across the manor, complaining about the quality of his imported Hungarian pepper. The contrast is laughable if you're into bitter irony. Peasants like Baldric build the world, nobles decorate it. But still, Baldric keeps going. Because the animals need fencing, the grain needs grinding, the firewood needs chopping. And nobody cares that your back feels like it's been cursed by 3 minor demons and a vengeful squirrel. By midday, the village is a hive of soggy activity. Men repairing thatched roofs that leak more than the shelter, women hauling water from a stream that smells like regret. Children collect sticks and do not question why their hands are always numb. And Baldric? Still on the fence, still losing the battle to mud and time. There's no lunch break, not really. Just a quick pause to chew on a hunk of leftover bread that's now extra chewy thanks to the rain. He bites down and hears something crack. Hopefully it's not a tooth. Probably a pebble, not flavor. He washes it down with a gulp of ale from a wooden flask older than 3 of his kids. It's warm now because insulation is for people with disposable income. But at least it's liquid. That counts as hydration. As the day drags on, Baldric shifts to firewood. The village hearths won't stoke themselves. He takes his axe, blunt, uneven, inherited from a cousin who once mistook his foot for a log, and starts swinging. Each chop sends a jolt up his spine. Each splinter is a love letter from the forest addressed to his palms. He stacks the wood, slowly, painfully, muttering curses at trees, nobles, and occasionally at clouds that mock him with every gust. His tunic is stuck to him, his socks are history, and yet he doesn't stop. Because stopping is a luxury, Baldric gave that up the day he was born into a world where free time means you're probably dead. And here's the thing, no one thanks him. No applause, no gold stars. The knowledge that maybe the roof won't leak tonight and the fire won't die before dawn. If the fence holds, the goat won't escape again and return with another chicken vendetta. It's a life measured in minor wins and avoided disasters. As the sun begins to sink, or rather, the clouds shift enough to suggest it might be setting, Baldric gathers his tools, or what's left of them, and limps home. Every joint screams. His arms tremble, his stomach growls. But his soul, it's quiet. Because even in all this madness, he knows what comes next. Sleep. That sacred, well-earned, deeply primal sleep we talked about. The kind that hits you like a haystack falling from the loft. The kind where your dreams are weird, vivid, and slightly mold-scented. But we're not there yet. First comes the return to the hut, the chaos. The fire needs relighting. The kids that need wrangling. The goat that somehow made it on top of the table again. But soon, Baldric will lie back on that sack of straw, surrounded by family, filth, and faint hopes. He'll feel the cold begin to fade, the firelight flicker, and he'll drift back into the sleep only a peasant knows, bone deep, snore loud, drool on your own arm sleep. But before that, he must survive the evening. And trust me, dear listener, the evening holds its surprises. So stick around. You haven't met the Rat King yet. By the time Baldric stumbles back through the creaking wooden door of his mud-plastered home, he looks and smells like a man who lost a fist fight with the forest. His tunic is soaked, clinging to him like a needy ghost. His hands are raw, his shoulders scream in protest, and there's a sliver of something suspiciously insect-like wriggling in the cuff of his sleeve. But he's home. In the medieval world, surviving a day of labor without falling into a ditch, being mauled by livestock, or being struck down by the mysterious coughing death is a good day. Inside the hut, the evening chaos is in full swing. The fire has been stoked back to life, sort of. It sputters, crackles, belches smoke like it's trying to burn the entire past. The room smells of boiled onions, wet wool, goat breath, and something that might be feet but could just as easily be defeat. Mildred is wrangling a pot over the hearth, praying that the stew doesn't taste like regret tonight. Two of the kids are chasing the chicken in tight, squealing circles. The third is gnawing on a piece of old bread with the tenacity of a medieval badger. The fourth is asleep in the corner, wrapped in a blanket that probably hasn't been washed since birth. Grumble, the goat, is standing on the table. Again, no one knows how he keeps getting up there. He's a large, round animal with terrible balance and zero respect for boundaries. Yet he is looking proud, chewing on something that may once have been a sock, staring at Baldric like he owns the place. Off, Baldric says, his voice cracking between exhaustion and resignation. Grumble does not move. With a sigh, Baldric drops his axe near the wall, shrugs off his cloak, and takes the stew ladle from Mildred before she accidentally bludgeons the goat with it. It's their version of teamwork. Not romantic, not elegant. Just two people surviving side by side, trading off responsibilities like blisters. Dinner is served, a suspiciously beige pottage with floating bits of unidentifiable origin and a smell that says, "We tried." Everyone gets a bowl, more like a carved-out chunk of wood with personality, and huddles near the fire, knees touching, backs aching, eyes half shut. No one speaks, not because they're not allowed, but because it's understood. This is not a meal for talking. It's a meal for not dying. The stew is thick. It clings to the spoon and resists swallowing. Somewhere inside is a lentil from last Tuesday. Maybe even a turnip. Maybe. They eat silently, the only sounds being slurping, chewing, and the occasional cough. Frida the chicken perches on the hearth, watching them like some feathered deity judging their life choices. After the meal, the bowls were stacked, the children washed with cold water and questionable soap, and the fire tended to once more. The day winds down, but medieval life doesn't release relaxation like candy. There's still work to do. Tools to check, leaks to patch, animals to count. And yes, that includes whatever creature is now living in the wall. Something's been scratching in there since Monday, and Baldric is sure it has a name. Eventually, as the darkness thickens and the cold starts to sneak in from under the door, the family gathers around the fire for what can only be described as bedtime prep, which mainly consists of strategically placing everyone on the floor like some chaotic human jigsaw puzzle. Baldric's bed is still there, a pile of straw with more personality than comfort. It smells like musty dreams and faint trauma. He stomps on it once, punches it for good measure, and declares it ready. The blanket? Heavy, woolen, and damp at the edges. The kids crawl under it first, forming a little nest of elbows, knees, and bedtime farts. Mildred joins next, pulling the edges tight to trap whatever body heat they can generate. Then Baldric lies down, not gracefully, not with flair. He flops, like a tree falling in the woods. Everyone hears it. There's no bedtime story unless you count Mildred's quick reminder not to roll onto the baby. No lullabies, no nightlights. Just the flicker of the fire, the soft rustle of straw, and the sound of Grumble finally jumping off the table, probably onto something fragile. But here's where things get weird. Just as the family starts to drift off, sometime after the fire dims, Baldric wakes up before the goat begins snoring. Eyes open. Brain alert. Body sore, but restless. This is where medieval magic kicks in. It's called two sleeps. That's right, peasants didn't sleep in one long 8-hour chunk. They slept in two distinct sessions. First sleep, then a waking period, then a second sleep. No one thought it was strange. No one called it insomnia. It was just life. During that in-between time, people didn't panic. They didn't count sheep, They didn't scroll Twitter on a candle. They sat, they talked, they stared into the fire like it had secrets. Some prayed, some meditated, some, well, let's say a lot of medieval cardio happened. Baldric, as always, chooses the quiet route. He sits up, wraps himself in the blanket, and pokes at the fire with a stick. Sparks rise, shadows dance across the walls. For a few minutes, he's there. Not working and not eating and not surviving, just existing. It's the closest thing he'll get to peace all day. Sometimes Mildred joins him. She stays wrapped up tonight, snoring gently, her arm draped over two children like she's claiming them in a medieval game of human Tetris. Eventually, the second sleep comes. It's slower, heavier, deeper. Baldric lies back down, now lulled by the fire's dying glow, the sound of wind whispering through the cracks in the wall, and the strangely comforting scent of onions, goat, and human exhaustion. His eyelids fall, his body curls instinctively to share warmth, and this time sleep claims him completely. There are no dreams, just the deep, unmoving rest of a man who has nothing left to give and no expectations for tomorrow, except to wake up, ache again, and do it all again. And that, dear listener, is what real bedtime looked like in the medieval world. No silk sheets, no sleep masks, just raw, uncomfortable, oddly satisfying survival. So next time you wake up at 2 a.m. and wonder why, don't panic. Just think of Baldric, staring into the fire, wrapped in a scratchy blanket, with a goat on the table and a chicken on the stove. It's not broken sleep, it's historical accuracy. Baldric wakes just before sunrise, eyelids heavy, mouth dry, and legs tangled in wool and sibling limbs. The fire has died down to a few flickering embers, casting long shadows on the wall. The chill has returned, crawling through the thatched ceiling, slithering across the dirt floor, and settling into the room's corners like a silent, judgmental ghost. It's not a pleasant awakening, but it is familiar. As he blinks through the semi-darkness, adjusting to the day that hasn't quite started, his body registers a single fact: it made it through another night. And that's no small thing. Because sleeping in a medieval home wasn't just about closing your eyes and waiting for dreams. No, it was about engineering survival. It was about making strategic choices amid filth, cold, noise, and questionable architecture. And the biggest strategy of all? Layers. Not just in clothing, but in every aspect of sleeping life. Let's start with the bed, or more accurately, the designated, less painful spot on the floor. Baldric's straw mattress isn't glamorous, but it's the centerpiece of his nighttime strategy. He didn't buy it, he built it. A sack stuffed with hay, dried rushes, a few feathers, and what might once have been part of a curtain. He punches it back into shape every few weeks with his fists like he's settling an old score. If he's lucky, it doesn't bite back. If he is lucky, he doesn't wake up with a splinter in his lower spine. But even with his deluxe straw pile, Baldric knows the bed alone won't save him from the cold that seeps in like regret. That's where the layers come in. First, there's the shirt he wore all day, because no one's changing into pajamas when laundry means dragging fabric to a frozen stream and hoping it doesn't shatter like medieval glass. He sleeps in what he wears unless wet, bloody, or actively on fire. Simple rule. On top of that shirt, another tunic could be used. He might layer two if it's one of the good weeks and no one's vomited on it. Then comes the blanket. Not the soft fleece kind. No, this one is woven from wool, weighed down by years of use, the occasional rat nibble, and a lingering scent that says, "I've seen things. It's thick, it's heavy, it smells like old stew and defeat." But it works. That weight? That's deep pressure stimulation, though Baldric calls it the demon blocker. It holds in the warmth, presses out the cold, and maybe even keeps the nightmares at bay. But even more critical than layers of fabric are the layers of people. Because in Baldric's world, you don't sleep alone. Ever. There's no personal space. There's only survival. Human insulation is the most reliable heat source, and Baldric's family uses it fully. Mildred, the kids, and even Grumble the goat all huddle together under that smelly woolen blanket like it's a group project in not freezing to death. And it's not comfortable. Let's be very clear. Someone always kicks. Someone always snores. Someone always farts, usually the goat. The children squirm. The chicken occasionally wanders across a face. And yet, despite the chaos, the heat generated from 6 bodies, plus 1 angry livestock, is enough to keep frostbite out of the picture. It's a furnace fueled by closeness and shared misery, and it works. Now let's talk sound. You might think noise would be the enemy of sleep, but not here. In Baldric's house, the sound is comfort. It means everyone's still breathing. There's the low wheeze of Mildred dreaming about bread, the rhythmic suckling noises of the youngest child. The goat mutters in its sleep, a soft, scratchy rustling from the far wall, probably the rat Baldric has named Greg, who shows up every night like clockwork. Even the wind, moaning through the gaps in the roof, is oddly soothing. No white noise machines, no rainfall apps. It's just the ambient soundtrack of medieval domestic life. You fall asleep to it. You stay asleep because of it. And if it ever stops, you worry, because silence might mean someone's gone cold. And the smell. Oh, the smell. Forget lavender oil or scented candles. Forget clean linen or freshly fluffed pillows. This sleep environment comes with a signature scent that is unforgettable. It's a layered fragrance. First, there's smoke from the fire, woody, thick, and clinging to every fabric and follicle. Then comes the human element, sweat, unwashed feet, garlic-filled breath, and sadness. The barnyard bouquet kicks in next, goat fur, wet hay, chicken dust, and a hint of mildew. Modern noses would rebel, but to Baldric, it's home. And like it or not, the scent is powerful. The brain ties it to memory, to routine, to safety. So that uniquely pungent cocktail doesn't keep him awake. It lulls him to sleep. It tells him, this is where you belong. This is where you survive. As Baldric lies there, surrounded by smell, warmth, and noise, drifting into the second sleep of the night, he's unaware of the science. He's not thinking about serotonin or sleep cycles. He's not concerned with sleep hygiene. He's just existing, nestled in medieval family life's thick, messy layers. And it works. His heart slows, his breath evens out. One child shifts and mumbles in his sleep. Grumble lets out a soft bleat. The fire crackles, then settles. Baldric's body, exhausted from a day of shoveling, hauling, yelling, and biting stale bread, finally surrenders again. He doesn't dream of riches or escape. He doesn't need to. All he needs is for the roof not to cave in, the rat to stay in its corner, and the goat not to sit on his chest this time. Because in this world, sleep isn't elegant. It's not pretty, but it's earned, and somehow, against all odds, it's enough. And so he sleeps deeply, thoroughly, and with the strange contentment of a man who knows that tomorrow will be just as hard, cold, and exhausting. But tonight, just for now, he's warm. He's not alone. And for medieval Baldric, that's the dream. Baldric wakes to the smell of smoke. Not the comforting kind from a morning hearth, but the sharp, biting kind that tells you something is probably on fire. He jolts upright, nearly headbutting the goat, who is inexplicably curled around his left foot like a judgmental house slipper. A quick scan of the room reveals the cause. The cooking pot had tipped slightly into the embers during the night, charring the remains of last night's onion stew into a sticky, black crust now exhaling smoke like a dragon with indigestion. Mildred is already up, coughing and swatting at the haze with a damp rag. One of the kids starts crying, the others groaning. Frida, the chicken, flaps dramatically as if auditioning for a tragedy. Grumble the goat, of course, looks entirely unbothered. Chaos has returned. Morning in Baldric's household isn't a quiet affair. It's a slapstick apocalypse on repeat. And yet, it's in this smoky, frantic mess that the actual ritual begins. The medieval morning routine. It's not luxurious, it's not efficient, but it's essential. Once the coughing subsides and the stew is deemed non-lethal, Baldric and his family begin the slow, grim march into what passes for hygiene. The first order of business is scraping themselves into the illusion of cleanliness. There is no bathroom, no sink, no bathrobe, just a bucket of water collected from the nearest stream, depending on recent weather and livestock activity, ranges from muddy tea to biohazard. Today's water has bits in it. Nobody asks what the bits are. That would only lead to despair. Baldric crouches by the fire, strips off his top layer, and dunks a rag into the water. It's freezing. Not refreshingly cold, but criminally cold, like the water personally holds a grudge. He rubs it across his face, arms, and neck with the resigned sigh of a man who has given up on comfort but not quite dignity. This isn't bathing. This is a battle. He scrapes off layers of sweat, soot, and goat hair. Then he moves to his beard, which now holds a small twig, some straw, and, judging by the twitch, possibly a flea contemplating a long-term lease. He slaps at it. The flea bounces. Round one goes to Baldric. Next comes the oil. Yes, oil. Medieval peasants didn't have soap. Instead, They used whatever animal fat or cooking grease they could spare, rubbed into the skin and then scraped off with a curved blade called a strigil. Baldric's version is a flat piece of bone, vaguely sharp, stained from years of questionable use. He slathers the oil on like he's dressing a salad, then drags the bone down his arm. The muck comes off in streaks. It's both disgusting and oddly satisfying. There's no minty freshness, no foamy bubbles, just the smell of onions and pig fat. But it gets the job done in a world without shampoo or conditioner. Now it's time for the clothes, and here Baldric has options. Sort of. His wardrobe consists of 3 tunics, one wet, one torn, and one that might be both. He chooses the least offensive option, gives it a good shake to dislodge any passengers, and slips it over his head. The fabric is stiff, it smells like rain-soaked hay and despair. But it's intact, mostly, and that's enough. Underwear? Not a thing. Deodorant? You wish. Baldric applies a dab of ashes under his arms like it's cologne. Why? Because someone once said it keeps the stink away. He's unsure if that's true, but he's willing to believe anything at this point. Then come the shoes, or rather, the lack thereof. Baldric owns one pair of boots. They are leather, cracked, and so thin they whisper threats with every step. Today, he opts to go barefoot. It's not bravery. Yesterday's rain turned the road to sludge, and he'd rather ruin his skin than his only footwear. His feet hit the cold dirt floor. It's still damp. He steps on something squishy, possibly food or possibly a former mouse. Again, no one investigates. That way lies madness. By now, the kids are partially dressed. The chicken terrorizes the youngest, and Mildred attempts to braid her hair with fingers too cold to function. The house smells like smoke, boiled onions, and determination. And Baldric somehow is ready for the day. But the ritual doesn't end with clothes, it ends with the teeth. Now let's be clear. There were no toothbrushes in medieval times, not for peasants. Maybe a nobleman had one made from ivory and a unicorn horn, but was it Baldric? He's got a stick, a frayed, splintered, bitter-tasting twig he chews on every morning like a depressed beaver. He gnaws at it until the fibers spread, then scrapes it across his teeth. It doesn't do much. His breath still smells like beer and boiled lentils, but it's effort, and the effort is half the battle. If he's feeling fancy, he rinses with vinegar. Today, no vinegar, just spit and hope. And now, finally, the morning ritual is complete. Baldric steps outside, blinking against the early sun, or the cloud-filtered attempt at it. The wind greets him like an old enemy. He wraps his arms around himself, takes a breath, and begins the walk toward another day of toil. The path is muddy, the sky threatening more rain, and the smell of the village's combined efforts to stay clean hits him like a wet sock to the face. But despite the discomfort, there's something oddly grounding about it all. Baldric isn't trying to be clean. He's trying not to be worse. He's not aiming for freshness. He's aiming for functionality. Because in this world, cleanliness is not about luxury. It's about survival. It's about scraping away just enough of the dirt to feel human, to trick your brain into believing you're not just a walking pile of wool and labor. In a way, it works. The itch fades, the odor dulls, the oil glistens faintly in the sun. Baldric stands a little taller, his tunic clings a little less, his bones creak with slightly more confidence. Because medieval hygiene may be rough, it may be weird, but it's ritual. And in a world without control, rituals are everything. So the next time you moan about your lukewarm shower, remember Baldric, naked from the waist up, slathered in pig grease, scraping dirt off with a bone knife while a goat chews on his sock. Now that's what I call a morning routine. The village path is slick with last night's rain, and Baldric's bare feet squish into the mud like overripe pears. His toes are already numb. The wind, still holding a personal vendetta, slaps his face every few steps, reminding him that comfort is a myth and warmth is a fleeting dream. But Baldric doesn't flinch, because today, like every day, he's headed to the fields. Fields that do not care about your feelings. He walks past a neighbor struggling to carry a pile of wet firewood. No words are exchanged, just the nod of shared suffering. Two kids dash by, barefoot and shrieking, chased by a pig that looks entirely too confident. Somewhere in the distance, a woman is yelling at a cow as if the cow understands shame. It's morning, medieval style, and Baldric is, by all medieval metrics, prepared. Cleanish, dressedish, breathing, functioning. Now it's time for work. But before he gets there, he has to pass the Lord's Manor. And that's where everything slows down, because suddenly everything changes. The road widens slightly, the air feels different, less manure, more perfume. The sound of laughter drifts from a high window. Someone's playing a lute. Birds chirp here like they've signed a contract for ambience. This is the noble zone, and it reeks of privilege. Baldric pauses, feet still half buried in muck, and stares. Up on the manor balcony, Lady Historia, draped in silk and dreams, leans against a polished railing, sipping something out of a goblet so shiny it could guide ships. She is clean, radiantly, unfairly clean. Her hair is braided with ribbons. Her skin glows with oils that cost more than Baldric makes in a season. And her clothes, layers of embroidered fabric in colors peasants only dream about, flow around her like a story being told by someone who's never dug a ditch. It's not envy that Baldric feels, not exactly. It's more like observational nausea, because while he was oil scraping goat grease from his chest with a piece of bone, Lady Historia was likely soaking in a tub of warmed milk and flower petals while servants fanned her with goose feathers. The contrast is biblical, but Baldric keeps walking. He's seen it all before. He trudges past, dragging mud and humanity behind him like a shadow. The field awaits. By mid-morning, the sun is pretending to be helpful, hanging low behind thick clouds that offer more gloom than warmth. Baldric is knee-deep in planting trenches, hands black with soil, face streaked with sweat and ash. The ground is cold. His back aches. His fingernails are more dirt than nail. And he hasn't stopped moving for 3 hours. There's no break, no chair, no snack. Just the knowledge that this has to be done. Because if he doesn't plant today, there won't be food tomorrow. Not just for him, but for Mildred, the kids, Grumble the goat, and the ever-demanding Frida the chicken. Every peasant in this village knows the rhythm of the land, the digging, the planting, the waiting, the worrying. Rain could save you or drown you. Sun could bless the crops or bake them into crispy failures. There's no security, just hope. And that hope is heavy. Around midday, Baldric pauses. He wipes his hands on the inside of his tunic, grabs a hunk of bread from the cloth pouch tied to his belt, and takes a bite. It's hard, not crunchy, not toasted, hard, like might chip a tooth hard. But it's food, sort of. He chews slowly, staring at the horizon. The land stretches out, fields dotted with bent figures, all doing the same thing, fighting the earth with their bare hands. A silent, muddy army of survivalists. And suddenly, he remembers something. Last winter, during one of the colder nights, Baldric overheard a traveler talking in the tavern. The man had wandered from the south, through cities with cobblestone streets and people who wore shoes indoors. He'd said something strange, that in some lands, people don't work the fields themselves. They own them, yes? But the work? The dirt? That's someone else's job. Baldric had laughed then. It seemed absurd. How could someone not know the feeling of earth beneath their nails? Of aching legs, of falling into bed with every muscle screaming and still feeling grateful for the chance to do it all again tomorrow? But now, under this sky with this bread surrounded by fields that might feed him or betray him, it doesn't sound so absurd. It sounds like fantasy. Still, Baldric chews. And when the bell tolls from the village, 3 long clangs to signal midday tasks, he stands again. His bones crack, his legs shake, but his eyes are steady, because he knows what comes next. More digging, more planting, maybe chopping wood, maybe fixing the roof, maybe chasing Grumble out of someone else's garden for the 5th time this week. But first, he adjusts his tunic, ties the cloth pouch tighter, and mutters to himself, "Just make it to sunset." That's always the goal. The sun will go down, the cold will return, the fire will be lit, and then he'll crawl back into that bed-shaped straw pile, surrounded by noise, smell, warmth, and whatever's left of his dignity. He'll scrape the day off with oil and ash. He'll chew his stick, he'll swat at fleas, and he'll sleep, deeply, because his body has no other option. And maybe, just maybe, he'll wake in the middle of the night, stare at the fire, and feel alive. Not successful, not fulfilled, just alive. And in Baldric's world, that's enough. So if you're listening now, nestled under your electric blanket, dreading a workday with coffee breaks and ergonomic chairs, remember Baldric. Mud on his face, splinters in his hands, bread like bricks, and somehow still smiling because his children are fed, his house didn't collapse, and the goat didn't bite anyone today. That's a win. That's the medieval way. And tomorrow, he'll do it all again. The sun is finally beginning its descent, a dull orange disk sagging toward the horizon like it, too, has had enough of this day. Baldric straightens up from the furrow he's been hacking into the earth for the past hour, his back screaming in protest, his hands caked in a mixture of dirt, sweat, and something unidentifiable that may or may not be goat-related. He exhales slowly, eyes squinting toward the silhouette of the village where the thin smoke of 100 fires is curling up into the sky. Home, such as it is. Every bone in Baldric's body is vibrating with fatigue. He's been digging, planting, hauling, chopping, and nearly lost a toe when his shovel met a rock masquerading as fertile soil. His stomach is growling again because hard bread and air do not a satisfying lunch make, and his mouth is dry, tasting faintly of regret and barley. But despite everything, despite the cold creeping in, the numbness in his fingers, and the fact that he's pretty sure his right boot sole has finally given up, Baldric allows himself a small, crooked smile. Because the work is done. For now. And in the medieval world, finishing a day without bleeding, fainting, or being excommunicated is a triumph. He slings the shovel over his shoulder like a soldier returning from battle, because that's exactly what he is. Not with swords, not with glory, but with mud, sweat, and survival. And the battlefield? It's every inch of this unforgiving land that demands everything and gives back just enough to keep you crawling toward tomorrow. As he trudges down the path back to the village, his muscles burn, but it's a familiar burn. A burn that says, "You've earned your supper," assuming there is supper. The road is quiet now. Most of the villagers are already home, smoke pouring from chimneys, children screaming about nothing in particular, chickens roosting in the most inconvenient places. The mud squelches under his feet, colder now, slicker. He slips once, curses mildly, then keeps moving. Grumble the goat, who somehow appeared at the edge of the field an hour ago and refused to leave, follows loyally at his heels like a furry, four-legged insult. When Baldric finally reaches the hut, it's nearly dark. The sky is purple-gray, the kind of color that promises frost. The door creaks when he pushes it open. It always creaks. If it ever stopped creaking, they'd assume the plague had taken it. Inside, the hut is a chaotic masterpiece of medieval family life. The fire is lit but low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Mildred is stirring something in the pot, and judging by the smell, it's either root stew or that turnip again. The children are half asleep, half feral, rolling around under the blanket pile like overcooked dumplings. One of them has a stick. Another one seems to be eating that stick. Frida the chicken is perched on the mantel like a smug, feathered gargoyle. Grumble the goat immediately heads for the fire and sits down like a man clocking out of a shift. Baldric drops the shovel, peels off his outer layer with a grunt, and sinks to the floor like a bag of rocks with opinions. He's too tired to talk, too tired to think. He just stares at the fire and lets the warmth inch its way into his frozen limbs. Mildred hands him a bowl. It's hot, steaming, and smells vaguely edible. He takes it with a grunt of thanks, stirs it with a piece of stale bread, and starts eating. Slowly, methodically, like someone trying to chew through memory foam. But this is peace. This is what every miserable, blistering hour in the fields was for. This moment, this tiny oasis of food, firelight, and relative quiet, is worth it. Because here, in this cramped, damp hut filled with snoring children and livestock drama, Baldric is safe. Not rich, not comfortable, but safe. And that, in the medieval world, is priceless. After dinner, there's no Netflix, no scrolling, no midnight snacks. There's just cleaning the bowls, rebanking the fire, and preparing for the long, cold night. Baldric wipes his face with a rag that might have once been white, scratches the back of his neck, and begins the nightly ritual of sleep preparation, which mostly involves kicking the straw mattress back into something resembling a rectangle and convincing Grumble to sleep near, but not on, the blanket. The kids pile in. Mildred settles down. Baldric stretches out beside them all, his body sinking into the straw like it's trying to disappear. The blanket comes over, the fire crackles, the wind hums, and for a moment, just a breath, really, everything feels okay. He thinks about the day, the dirt, the noblewoman's balcony, the way the sun hit the fields just before it sank behind the trees, the ache in his shoulders, the laughter of his kids, the weird, quiet pride of having survived another day. This isn't the kind of life that gets written into songs. There's no epic, no hero's journey, but it's real, raw, earned. And tonight, like every night, Baldric will sleep knowing that he faced the day head-on and lived to grumble about it. Because at the end of the day, when the fire dims and the wind whispers and the goat finally stops chewing his sleeve, Baldric knows one thing for sure: he'll do it again tomorrow. Because survival isn't glamorous, but it's powerful. And in this world of dirt and cold and silence, there's something deeply human about going to bed with empty hands but a full soul. Now close your eyes, breathe in that smoky air, hear the fire, feel the straw, smell the stew, and remember, in the heart of hardship, there is still home. The fire has burned down to a dull orange pulse. Outside, the wind shifts and whistles through the cracks in the wood, slipping beneath the poorly sealed door like a sly, icy snake. Inside, all is still. The children have gone limp, scattered in odd sleeping positions that suggest a wrestling match ended mid-move. Mildred breathes softly beside them, her hand resting protectively over the smallest one's back. Even Grumble, whose bedtime routine usually involves a solid 15 minutes of passive-aggressive hoof scraping, is finally asleep, curled up at the foot of the bed like a furry boulder with questionable dreams. And Baldric, he lies awake. Not because he isn't tired, he's exhausted in a way that makes bones hum, but because this is his moment. This sliver of the night, tucked between chaos and sunrise, is the only time he truly has to himself. He stares into the glowing remains of the hearth, the flickering light dancing across soot-streaked walls. It casts long shadows behind the clay jars, the bundle of dried herbs, the wooden spoon wedged into a crack in the wall. Everything in this room has a story, a purpose, a struggle baked into its grain. And in the silence, Baldric thinks about the past, the future. Mostly the immediate present, which involves wondering whether tomorrow's stew will be slightly better or slightly worse than tonight's root mystery special. His thoughts drift, slow and aimless like the smoke curling toward the rafters. He doesn't dare move much. The straw mattress crunches too loudly, and he doesn't want to wake the baby, or the goat, especially not the goat. But even here, in this quiet cocoon of warmth and shared breath, danger simmers just outside the door. Because this isn't just a hard life, it's a precarious one. The medieval village may seem still at night, but beneath the surface, it's always shifting. There's no shortage of threats: sickness, famine, bad weather, worse people. And tonight, as the wind moans a little louder and the air grows sharper, Baldric feels that edge, like the world is holding its breath. He closes his eyes for just a moment and then hears it. A knock. Not loud. Not frantic, just a soft, deliberate tap on the wooden door. He freezes. His eyes snap open, breath caught halfway in his chest. Every instinct tells him to ignore it. No one visits in the middle of the night unless something's wrong. Very wrong. Another knock. A pause, then a voice. Baldric. Low. Familiar. Urgent. It's Eldric, the tanner's apprentice from 2 houses down. A boy barely into adulthood with too much voice and not enough sense. If he's at Baldric's door now, it's not about borrowed tools or help with the firewood. It's something darker. Baldric pushes the blanket aside carefully, easing himself up without shifting the children. The cold hits him instantly, sharp as glass. He steps lightly, each movement rehearsed from years of navigating straw, limbs, and sleeping livestock. He opens the door. Eldric stands there, pale and shaking, lantern clutched in one trembling hand. His face, always ruddy and loud in the daylight, is ghost-like in the flickering light. "It's old Mother Hilda," he says, barely above a whisper. She's not waking up, and there's something wrong with her eyes. Baldric doesn't need more details. Old Mother Hilda is the village midwife, healer, and unofficial oracle, the woman who knows which weeds won't kill you, which mushrooms will, and how to yank a tooth without making you see the afterlife prematurely. She's survived plague, war, and that one winter when everyone just ate turnips and cried. If she's down, truly down, it's bad. Real bad. He nods, grabs his cloak, and steps outside. The cold slaps him instantly, but adrenaline overrides discomfort. Eldric leads the way, lantern swaying, boots crunching over frost-crusted mud. The village is silent, doors are shut, windows dark. Even the animals seem to know something is off. They reach Hilda's hut, a leaning shack of herbs, bones, and hanging bundles of wisdom. Inside, it's too quiet. The fire is dead, the air smells wrong, and there she is. Old Hilda lies curled on her side, eyes half open, unmoving. Her mouth is slightly ajar, and her skin, normally weathered and pink, is ashen. There's no blood, no signs of violence, just stillness. But her eyes, Baldric leans closer. They're cloudy, not with sleep, not with death, with something else, something ancient. Ealdric swallows hard. She was fine at dusk. I saw her, gave me some sage for the baby's rash. Baldric says nothing, just stares, because in the center of her palm, burned into the skin like it was kissed by fire, is a mark, a spiral, small, deep, unfamiliar, not a wound, not a scar, a symbol. And suddenly the stories come back, the ones whispered on long winter nights, of things that come in the dark, spirits that mark those who know too much, of omens. He steps back, heart pounding. This isn't sickness, this is something older. He turns to Ealdric. Tell no one yet, not until we speak to Father Thorn. The boy nods, wide-eyed. Baldric covers Hilda with a cloth, muttering a prayer he hasn't used in years. Then he leaves the hut, walking quickly now, mind racing. Because something has changed, something old and quiet has shifted in the village. And tomorrow, when the sun rises, the air will carry more than just frost. It will carry fear. And Baldric, tired, filthy, brave Baldric, knows he might not sleep quite so deeply ever again. So there you are, Baldric, our grizzled, not-quite hero, staggering out of a tavern that smells like soup betrayal and wet goat, your pouch slightly heavier, but your dignity nowhere to be found. You've made it through assassinations, back-alley deals, questionable breakfasts, and enough lice to populate a small army. And now, it's time to embrace your final challenge of the day, going to sleep without dying. Yes, that's harder than it sounds, because here's the thing. Bedtime in medieval times wasn't pull up the covers and drift into dreams kind of cozy. It was more like, let's try not to get eaten, stabbed, or wake up with your face frozen to the wall. Especially for a man like Baldric, who's carrying secrets, enemies, and an old injury that aches every time the wind changes. The road back home isn't so much a road as it is a vaguely trampled suggestion through muck. And Baldric, half drunk and half aware, has to sneak past the night guards, who are as sharp as boiled turnips but twice as aggressive when they're bored. He ducks behind barrels, tiptoes past dogs, and nearly gets into a fight with a laundry line. It's a miracle he doesn't end up sleeping in a ditch, spooning a turnip. Eventually, home appears. Not inviting, not safe, just there. A one-room shack shared with 4 children, one very loud wife, and possibly a ghost, but they haven't officially confirmed that yet. The air inside is thick with smoke, stew, and the kind of humidity that only comes from 8 people exhaling over a single flame. Baldric doesn't have a bed, he has a straw pile. Technically it's a mattress, but really it's a sneeze trap held together by wishful thinking and goat hair. He collapses onto it like a bag of regrets, pulling a scratchy wool blanket over himself. This blanket, mind you, smells like every illness that didn't quite kill him in 1346. But Baldric doesn't complain. He can't. The baby's crying, the twins are kicking each other, and someone just farted something biblical. It's bedtime, medieval style, loud, itchy, and extremely communal. Privacy? That's a fantasy Baldric gave up around the time he realized the family goat thinks his pillow is also its bathroom. He stares at the ceiling, wooden beams sagging under the weight of 3 centuries and one suspicious rat. His eyes flutter shut. And then, as if summoned by Satan himself, it begins. Second sleep. Yes, dear listener, this was a thing. Medieval folks didn't sleep straight through the night. Nope. They'd sleep a few hours, wake up around midnight, and stay awake for an hour or 2 before drifting back down. Scholars say it was a time for prayer, reflection, or quiet intimacy. For Baldric, it's mostly cursing quietly while trying not to elbow his wife's foot out of his face. He rolls over. The straw crinkles. Something bites him. He slaps it. It might have been his own child. Hard to tell in the dark. The fire has died down to embers, the cold creeping in like a polite burglar. Every joint in his body cracks like an old castle gate, and he wonders, just for a moment, what it might be like to sleep alone. In a bed, with sheets and silence. Then a fart echoes like a trumpet of war, and that fantasy evaporates. But he's alive. Still breathing, still beneath that heavy wool plague blanket, still halfway sane. He's made it through another day, and in this world where death waits in your stew, your bath, and probably your bread, surviving is the closest thing to success. So he whispers to the darkness, to the lice, to whatever God might be listening, maybe tomorrow will be better. And with that, he drifts back into the second sleep, dreaming not of glory, not of riches, but of a night without fleas. Because in the medieval world, That's the real fantasy. The second sleep comes and goes like a thief. Baldric doesn't remember the exact moment he fell back into it, only that he woke to a rooster's shriek that sounded less like dawn and more like betrayal. The light in the hut is pale and pitiful, sneaking in through the cracks like it's ashamed of itself. Everything smells like overboiled stew, wet wool, and family history. Baldric sits up, back cracking like firewood, head pounding from a mixture of sleep deprivation, last night's mead, and the emotional toll of sleeping in a house where the goat gets more legroom than he does. Outside, the village is beginning its slow, painful crawl into the day. Smoke curls from rooftops. Chickens argue about territory. Somewhere down the lane, someone's yelling about a missing boot. Business as usual. But Baldric doesn't rise with his usual groan. Something's different today. It's not the children, still snoring in a pile of limbs and crumbs. It's not the goat, chewing something it probably shouldn't. It's the air. It has weight, pressure, like the sky has decided to lean in a little closer. He pulls on his boots, still damp, still regretful, and steps outside, and he sees it. On the door of old Mother Hilda's hut, what's left of it, is a mark. Not painted, burned. A spiral, just like the one branded into her hand. Only now it's larger, rougher, scorched into the wood like a message, a warning. And Baldric, for all his years of mud and misery, knows exactly what it means. Something has woken up. He rushes to the village square where others are already gathered, sleepy eyes, mismatched shoes, some still clutching bowls of oats or half-dressed children. And there, in the center, is Father Thorn. The priest stands solemnly, robes heavy with damp and unspoken panic. He points to the sky. At first, no one sees it. Then they do. A crow. Then another. Then dozens. Circling above the woods beyond the fields, dark and endless, forming a spiral. The same shape, again. Nature reflecting nightmare. Whispers ripple through the crowd. They say she was cursed, marked by the old gods. No, it's the sickness returning, the black rot. Baldric says nothing, just watches. Eyes narrow, brain racing. Because last night wasn't just bad stew and late-night dread. It was something shifting, something ancient returning. And it wasn't done yet. Later that day, he visits what's left of Hilda's hut. The door swings on one hinge. Inside, it's colder than it should be, like the fire forgot it ever existed here. Her belongings remain untouched, except for the herbs. Every bundle has withered. Overnight, impossible unless something unnatural passed through. And then he sees it. A piece of parchment, pinned to the underside of the hearthstone, hidden from plain sight. A symbol drawn in ash, not a spiral, a circle. Inside it, a name, Baldric. He stumbles back, heart punching against his ribs. His name, in her handwriting, marked in ash. The silence thickens. He suddenly remembers the strange dreams he's been having. Visions of fire, of something whispering from under the earth, of doors that open without sound. He thought it was just stew-related. But now he's not so sure. That night, sleep doesn't come easy. The house feels tighter. Every creak in the rafters sounds like footsteps. Even Grumble is restless, pacing and snorting, ears twitching at sounds no one else hears. Mildred notices. "You're thinking too loud," she mutters from under the blanket. "I found my name," Baldric replies. She sighs. "Again?" "No, I mean really found it. Burned. In ash. Hilda left it." That gets her attention. She sits up, hair wild, face lit by firelight. "Then we need to go, if you've been marked." "I'm not running." He says it without thinking and immediately regrets the weight of his own words. But it's true. Because this village, muddy, miserable, loud, it's home. And if something old is waking up here, Baldric isn't going to let it tear his world apart without a fight. He spends the next day gathering what little he can, talking to people, listening, digging through the brittle stories passed down in whispers. The spiral wasn't just a curse, it was a calling. And those who were marked, they were chosen, not to die, but to remember, to guard, to stand between the world and whatever waited just beyond it. And Baldric, he's no hero. He's not clever, not strong, not noble, but he is stubborn, painfully so, and maybe that's enough. So when the next night comes and the spiral reappears, this time drawn in chalk at the edge of the village well, Baldric doesn't flinch. He steps forward, into the dark, into the cold, into whatever waits. Because sometimes surviving isn't just about sleep and stew. Sometimes it's about standing when the world tells you to kneel. And Baldric, with his lice, his limp, and his lumpy mattress, chooses to stand. The second sleep comes and goes like a thief. Baldric doesn't remember the exact moment he fell back into it, only that he woke to a rooster's shriek that sounded less like dawn and more like betrayal. The light in the hut is pale and pitiful, sneaking in through the cracks like it's ashamed of itself. Everything smells like overboiled stew, wet wool, and family history. Baldric sits up, back cracking like firewood, head pounding from a mixture of sleep deprivation, last night's mead, and the emotional toll of sleeping in a house where the goat gets more legroom than he does. Outside, the village is beginning its slow, painful crawl into the day. Smoke curls from rooftops, chickens argue about territory, somewhere down the lane someone's yelling about a missing boot. Business as usual. But Baldric doesn't rise with his usual groan. Something's different today. It's not the children, still snoring in a pile of limbs and crumbs. It's not the goat chewing something it probably shouldn't, it's the air. It has weight, pressure, like the sky has decided to lean in a little closer. He pulls on his boots, still damp, still regretful, and steps outside, and he sees it. On the door of old Mother Hilda's hut, what's left of it, is a mark. Not painted, burned. A spiral, just like the one branded into her hand. Only now it's larger, rougher, scorched into the wood like a message. A warning. And Baldric, for all his years of mud and misery, knows exactly what it means. Something has woken up. He rushes to the village square, where others are already gathered. Sleepy eyes, mismatched shoes, some still clutching bowls of oats or half-dressed children. And there in the center is Father Thorn. The priest stands solemnly, robes heavy with damp and unspoken panic. He points to the sky. At first no one sees it, then they do. A crow, then another, then dozens. Circling above the woods beyond the fields, dark and endless, forming a spiral, the same shape, again. Nature reflecting nightmare. Whispers ripple through the crowd. They say she was cursed, marked by the old gods. No, it's the sickness returning, the black rot. Baldric says nothing, just watches. Eyes narrow, brain racing. Because last night wasn't just bad stew and late night dread. It was something shifting, something ancient returning. And it wasn't done yet. Later that day, he visits what's left of Hilda's hut. The door swings on one hinge. Inside, it's colder than it should be, like the fire forgot it ever existed here. Her belongings remain untouched, except for the herbs. Every bundle has withered, overnight. Impossible, unless something unnatural passed through. And then he sees it. A piece of parchment pinned to the underside of the hearthstone, hidden from plain sight. A symbol drawn in ash, not a spiral, a circle. Inside it, a name, Baldric. He stumbles back, heart punching against his ribs. His name, in her handwriting, marked in ash. The silence thickens. He suddenly remembers the strange dreams he's been having. Visions of fire, of something whispering from under the earth, of doors that open without sound. He thought it was just stew-related. But now he's not so sure. That night, sleep doesn't come easy. The house feels tighter. Every creak in the rafters sounds like footsteps. Even Grumble is restless, that pacing and snorting, ears twitching at sounds no one else hears. Mildred notices. "You're thinking too loud," she mutters from under the blanket. "I found my name," Baldric replies. She sighs. "Again? No, I mean really found it. Burned. In ash. Hilda left it." That gets her attention. She sits up, hair wild, face lit by firelight. "Then we need to go. If you've been marked, I'm not running." He says it without thinking and immediately regrets the weight of his own words. But it's true, because this village, muddy, miserable, loud, it's home. And if something old is waking up here, Baldric isn't going to let it tear his world apart without a fight. He spends the next day gathering what little he can, talking to people, listening, digging through the brittle stories passed down in whispers. The spiral wasn't just a curse, it was a calling. And those who were marked, they were chosen. Not to die, but to remember, to guard, to stand between the world and whatever waited just beyond it. And Baldric, he's no hero. He's not clever, not strong, not noble, but he is stubborn, painfully so. And maybe that's enough. So when the next night comes and the spiral reappears, this time drawn in chalk at the edge of the village well, Baldric doesn't flinch. He steps forward, into the dark, into the cold, into whatever waits. Because sometimes surviving isn't just about sleep and stew. Sometimes it's about standing when the world tells you to kneel. And Baldric, with his lice, his limp, and his lumpy mattress, chooses to stand. Baldric stood still for a long while, letting the chill of the night root into his boots, as if his soul needed a moment to catch up with his body. The stars above, normally steady companions in the medieval night, now seemed restless, quivering faintly as if whispering secrets in a language just outside human comprehension. He turned his eyes back to the well where the spiral had vanished. Nothing remained, not a trace. But the air still buzzed with memory. He walked home in a fog, but not the comforting kind. This was a haze of something ancient, bone deep and soul heavy. Each step felt like it could snap the silence in two, like he was walking through glass dreams. When he pushed the door open to his hut, the warmth inside greeted him with a punch. Not because it was comforting, but because it reminded him of how small, how painfully fragile his world truly was. Mildred was awake, sitting by the fire with a stare sharp enough to cut bread. The children slept, unaware of the storm that had passed, or the one still brewing in the sky. Grumble snored beside the hearth, oblivious, as always, to cosmic dread. "What happened?" she asked without looking up. "I was chosen," he said quietly, almost more to himself than to her. Mildred blinked. "You were what?" Baldric didn't answer. Not right away. He simply sat beside her, staring into the flames, watching them flicker and dance with a rhythm that felt too familiar now. Every flicker looked like a spiral. Every shadow stretched like the long fingers of something ancient. "They wanted me to open something," he finally said. "But I didn't. I remembered instead." "Remembered what?" "That it should stay shut." Mildred looked at him for a long moment. Then, in a tone that mixed sarcasm with fear, she asked, "So, we're not all going to die tomorrow?" Baldric shrugged. "Not because of me." It wasn't much of a promise. He went to bed, but sleep never came. His eyes stayed open, ears tuned to every creak of the roof, every cough from a child, every twitch from the goat. He expected something to knock or whisper or creep in through the cracks, but nothing came. And that was worse, because now it was waiting. The next morning, the sun rose as it always did. Too early, too bright, as if it hadn't received the memo about looming eldritch doom. Baldric stepped outside and noticed it immediately. Everyone was watching him, from doorways behind carts through cracked windows. Eyes tracked him, wide, wary, expectant. The spiral had vanished, but the rumors had not. Father Thorn was gone, vanished without a trace, and the villagers, though uneducated in arcane lore, knew the smell of trouble when it floated in on the morning mist. Old Marjorie from the East Hill clutched her rosary tighter. Little Tad ran past him without the usual, "Oi, stinky man!" which frankly was more disturbing than endearing. Even the baker offered him a full loaf without demanding payment. That was unsettling. They thought he'd done something terrible. They weren't wrong. At midday, a council was called, which sounds formal, but really it was 5 villagers with enough teeth and opinions to qualify as decision-makers. Baldric was summoned to the square, again. But this time, he didn't come as a peasant. He came as something else. He stood tall, cloak dusty, face unreadable. The elders circled like vultures around a rumor. "What did you do?" one asked. "Where's Father Thorn?" another demanded. Baldric raised a hand, not to silence, but to command. "I didn't open the door," he said. That got their attention. "What door?" "The one under the well," he replied, eyes narrowing. "The one Hilda warned us about. The one we forgot." Murmurs. Someone gasped. Someone scoffed. "You've been dreaming again, Baldric." He shook his head. "No, I've been called, and now it's your turn to remember." He pulled the scroll from his belt, the one Father Thorn left behind. He unrolled it in the center of the square, pressing it flat with a rock. The spiral glared up at them, stark and ancient, daring them to deny its truth. No one spoke, because deep down, they all knew. This wasn't just about magic or myth, it was about memory. About what happens when you forget the things your ancestors bled to contain. And Baldric? He wasn't forgetting again. The council disbanded in silence. That night, Baldric didn't sleep. He stayed by the fire, scroll in his lap, symbols in his head, the smell of ancient stone and cold iron still etched into his nose. At one point, Mildred joined him, sitting beside him without words. They stared into the flames, and for the first time in a long time, Baldric reached for her hand. It trembled, so did his. They weren't fighters, they weren't chosen by fate, but they were here. And whatever was coming, whatever the spiral whispered in dreams and doorways, they'd face it together. Outside, a new frost formed on the well, and beneath the earth, the door sighed. Not opening. Not yet. But it remembered too. Baldric stood still for a long while, letting the chill of the night root into his boots, as if his soul needed a moment to catch up with his body. The stars above, normally steady companions in the medieval night, now seemed restless, quivering faintly as if whispering secrets in a language just outside human comprehension. He turned his eyes back to the well where the spiral had vanished. Nothing remained. Not a trace. But the air still buzzed with memory. He walked home in a fog, but not the comforting kind. This was a haze of something ancient, bone deep and soul heavy. Each step felt like it could snap the silence in two, like he was walking through glass dreams. When he pushed the door open to his hut, the warmth inside greeted him with a punch. Not because it was comforting, but because it reminded him of how small, how painfully fragile his world truly was. Mildred was awake, sitting by the fire with a stare sharp enough to cut bread. The children slept, unaware of the storm that had passed, or the one still brewing in the sky. Grumble snored beside the hearth, oblivious, as always, to cosmic dread. "What happened?" she asked without looking up. "I was chosen," he said quietly, almost more to himself than to her. Mildred blinked. "You were what?" Baldric didn't answer. Not right away. He simply sat beside her, staring into the flames, watching them flicker and dance with a rhythm that felt too familiar now. Every flicker looked like a spiral. Every shadow stretched like the long fingers of something ancient. "They wanted me to open something," he finally said. "But I didn't. I remembered instead." "Remembered what?" "That it should stay shut." Mildred looked at him for a long moment. Then, in a tone that mixed sarcasm with fear, she asked, "So, we're not all going to die tomorrow?" Baldric shrugged. "Not because of me." It wasn't much of a promise. He went to bed, but sleep never came. His eyes stayed open, ears tuned every creak of the roof, every cough from a child, every twitch from the goat. He expected something to knock or whisper or creep in through the cracks, but nothing came. And that was worse, because now it was waiting. The next morning, the sun rose as it always did, too early, too bright, as if it hadn't received the memo about looming eldritch doom. Baldric stepped outside and noticed it immediately. Everyone was watching him. From doorways, behind carts, through cracked windows, eyes tracked him. Wide, wary, expectant. The spiral had vanished, but the rumors had not. Father Thorn was gone, vanished without a trace. And the villagers, though uneducated in arcane lore, knew the smell of trouble when it floated in on the morning mist. Old Marjorie from the East Hill clutched her rosary tighter. Little Tad ran past him without the usual, "Oi, stinky man!" which, frankly, was more disturbing than endearing. Even the baker offered him a full loaf without demanding payment. That was unsettling. They thought he'd done something terrible. They weren't wrong. At midday, a council was called, which sounds formal, but really it was 5 villagers with enough teeth and opinions to qualify as decision-makers. Baldric was summoned to the square. Again. But this time, he didn't come as a peasant, he came as something else. He stood tall, cloak dusty, face unriddable. The elders circled like vultures around a rumor. "What did you do?" one asked. "Where's Father Thorn?" another demanded. Baldric raised a hand, not to silence, but to command. "I didn't open the door," he said. That got their attention. "What door? The one under the well," he replied, eyes narrowing. "The one Hilda warned us about, the one we forgot." Murmurs. Someone gasped. Someone scoffed. "You've been dreaming again, Baldric." He shook his head. "No, I've been called, and now it's your turn to remember." He pulled the scroll from his belt, the one Father Thorn left behind. He unrolled it in the center of the square, pressing it flat with a rock. The spiral glared up at them, stark and ancient, daring them to deny its truth. No one spoke, because deep down they all knew. This wasn't just about magic or myth, it was about memory. About what happens when you forget the things your ancestors bled to contain. And Baldric? He wasn't forgetting again. The council disbanded in silence. That night, Baldric didn't sleep. He stayed by the fire, scroll in his lap, symbols in his head, the smell of ancient stone and cold iron still etched into his nose. At one point, Mildred joined him, sitting beside him without words. They stared into the flames, and for the first time in a long time, Baldric reached for her hand. It trembled. So did his. They weren't fighters. They weren't chosen by fate. But they were here, and whatever was coming, whatever the spiral whispered in dreams and doorways, they'd face it together. Outside, a new frost formed on the well, and beneath the earth the door sighed, not opening, not yet. But it remembered too. Baldric stood still for a long while, letting the chill of the night root into his boots as if his soul needed a moment to catch up with his body. The stars above, normally steady companions in the medieval night, now seemed restless, quivering faintly as if whispering secrets in a language just outside human comprehension. He turned his eyes back to the well where the spiral had vanished. Nothing remained. Not a trace. But the air. The air still buzzed with memory. He walked home in a fog, but not the comforting kind. This was a haze of something ancient, bone deep and soul heavy. Each step felt like it could snap the silence in two, like he was walking through glass dreams. When he pushed the door open to his hut, the warmth inside greeted him with a punch. Not because it was comforting, but because it reminded him of how small, how painfully fragile his world truly was. Mildred was awake, sitting by the fire with a stare sharp enough to cut bread. The children slept, unaware of the storm that had passed or the one still brewing in the sky. Grumble snored beside the hearth, oblivious, as always, to cosmic dread. "What happened?" she asked without looking up. "I was chosen," he said quietly, almost more to himself than to her. Mildred blinked. "You were what?" Baldric didn't answer. Not right away. He simply sat beside her, staring into the flames, watching them flicker and dance with a rhythm that felt too familiar now. Every flicker looked like a spiral. Every shadow stretched like the long fingers of something ancient. "They wanted me to open something," he finally said. "But I didn't. I remembered instead." "Remembered what?" "That it should stay shut." Mildred looked at him for a long moment. Then, in a tone that mixed sarcasm with fear, she asked, "So, we're not all going to die tomorrow?" Baldric shrugged. "Not because of me." It wasn't much of a promise. He went to bed, but sleep never came. His eyes stayed open, ears tuned to every creak of the roof, every cough from a child, every twitch from the goat. He expected something to knock or whisper or creep in through the cracks, but nothing came. And that was worse, because now it was waiting. The next morning, the sun rose as it always did. Too early, too bright, as if it hadn't received the memo about looming eldritch doom. Baldric stepped outside and noticed it immediately. Everyone was watching him. From doorways behind carts through cracked windows, eyes tracked him, wide, wary, expectant. The spiral had vanished, but the rumors had not. Father Thorn was gone, vanished without a trace. And the villagers, though uneducated in arcane lore, knew the smell of trouble when it floated in on the morning mist. Old Marjorie from the East Hill clutched her rosary tighter. Little Tad ran past him without the usual, "Oi, stinky man!" which, frankly, was more disturbing than endearing. Even the baker offered him a full loaf without demanding payment. That was unsettling. They thought he'd done something terrible. They weren't wrong. At midday, a council was called, which sounds formal, but really it was 5 villagers with enough teeth and opinions to qualify as decision-makers. Baldric was summoned to the square, again. But this time, he didn't come as a peasant. He came as something else. He stood tall, cloak dusty, face unreadable. The elders circled like vultures around a rumor. "What did you do?" one asked. "Where's Father Thorn?" another demanded. Baldric raised a hand, not to silence, but to command. "I didn't open the door," he said. That got their attention. "What door?" "The one under the well," he replied, eyes narrowing. "The one Hilda warned us about, the one we forgot." Murmurs. Someone gasped. Someone scoffed. "You've been dreaming again, Baldric." He shook his head. "No, I've been called, and now it's your turn to remember." He pulled the scroll from his belt, the one Father Thorn left behind. He unrolled it in the center of the square, pressing it flat with a rock. The spiral glared up at them, stark and ancient, daring them to deny its truth. No one spoke, because deep down they all knew. This wasn't just about magic or myth, it was about memory. About what happens when you forget the things your ancestors bled to contain. And Baldric, he wasn't forgetting again. The council disbanded in silence. That night, Baldric didn't sleep. He stayed by the fire, scroll in his lap, symbols in his head, the smell of ancient stone and cold iron still etched into his nose. At one point, Mildred joined him, sitting beside him without words. They stared into the flames, and for the first time in a long time, Baldric reached for her hand. It trembled. So did his. They weren't fighters, they weren't chosen by fate, but they were here, and whatever was coming, whatever the spiral whispered in dreams and doorways, they'd face it together. Outside, a new frost formed on the well, and beneath the earth, the door sighed. Not opening, not yet. But it remembered too. Morning returned to the village with the softest of whispers. Sunlight spilled over the rooftops like a cautious visitor, unsure whether it was welcome. For most, it brought with it a sense of fragile peace, a moment to breathe. But for Mildred, it was another day of aching stillness. One more sunrise without Baldric. He had vanished beneath the earth, swallowed by the ancient spiral to protect them all. The children had been returned, the door resealed, and the well now lay quiet. Too quiet. Not in a comforting way like the hush of snow or the silence before a kiss. No, this was the silence that lives in graveyards. Heavy, watching, waiting. Mildred went about her duties because someone had to. Bread still needed baking, goats still needed milking, children still needed reminding that washing behind the ears was not optional, but her hands felt distant from her body. Her mind kept drifting, back to the well, back to that pulsing glow, to the sound of Baldric's voice shouting into the dark. And worse, she dreamed. She dreamed of the cavern, the breathing walls, the fractured door, but most haunting of all, she dreamed of Baldric standing in the threshold of that ancient place, his back to her, unmoving, as if frozen between two worlds. She would call his name, always the same, every time. He never turned. On the seventh day, the humming returned. It started at dusk, faint, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. It resonated not through the air, but the ground, into their floors, their walls, their bones. The villagers noticed. They gathered near the well with lanterns and questions murmuring among themselves. Mildred arrived last, her face set like flint. The humming grew louder as she approached. Not in anger, but recognition. The well was glowing, not brightly, just a faint pulse like breath beneath a blanket. Then it spoke. Not aloud, not in any human voice. But in memory. The spiral was remembering, and so was she. A single vision seared itself into her mind. The journal Baldric had studied, lying open to a page marked with ash. She raced back to the hut, her fingers shaking as she tore through drawers, lifted floorboards, flung open cupboards. And there, beneath the old stew pot no one used since the goat incident of last winter, she found it. The page had warped from time and sweat and something else. But the words were clear. When the guardian's name is forgotten, the seal grows thin. But should a soul remember him, should one voice speak his name in light and shadow, the spiral may awaken a path. She read the line again and again. The spiral wasn't breaking. It was calling, not in warning, in invitation. That night, she lit every candle she could find. Her children stood beside her, wide-eyed and silent. The villagers gathered once more, and Mildred, standing at the edge of the well, held the journal high. "I know what this is," she said, loud enough for the wind to carry. "It's not danger, it's him. He's not lost, he's still there." Whispers. "Is she mad?" "It's grief." But she continued. "He held the door, he became the seal. But if he's still holding, he's still suffering. And the spiral, it's not calling him back, it's calling me forward." The well glowed brighter, as if in answer. Mildred stepped to the edge. "Mama, no," one of her children said, voice cracking. "I have to," she whispered, kneeling down. "He gave everything for us. I won't let his name vanish into the dark." She placed her palm on the stone, directly over the center of the spiral, and spoke. Baldric. The world trembled. Not the village, the world. The spiral surged with light, flooding upward, enveloping her. The villagers shielded their eyes. The children screamed, and Mildred vanished. She stood in the dark, not cold, not warm, just endless. Shapes moved around her. Spirals spinning, whispers rising. Every thought, every fear she had ever known fluttered past her like moths in the void. Then, light. A path formed beneath her feet, glowing stone, soft and alive. She followed it, step after step, her heart pounding, her breath loud in her ears, and there, at the end, stood the door, still massive, still fractured, and beside it, Baldric. His eyes were closed, his hands outstretched, fingers pressed into the seal, holding, always holding. "Baldric," she whispered. His eyes snapped open. They were full of stars. He turned slowly, as if the weight of centuries rested on his shoulders. "Mildred?" "I remembered," she said, and he smiled. It was the same crooked, tired smile he gave her every morning before chores, and it broke her heart anew. "I can't leave," he said. "The seal doesn't need to break," she said, "but it doesn't have to be yours alone." She reached for his hand. The spiral beneath them pulsed. The cavern shook, but the door stilled, because something was changing. Not power, not prophecy, presence, Two hands now held the door, two names remembered, two souls connected, and the door long feared finally rested. Back in the village, the well shimmered one last time, then faded, the humming stopped, and two voices echoed clear as bells, not in fear, not in pain, in peace. Remember us. The villagers gathered every year after that, not just to remember the spiral or the seal, but the names, the guardian, and the one who chose to join him, because memory is not just a way of looking back, it's a way of holding the world together. The spiral remained, burned into the center of the garden where grass once grew, its lines black and perfect, glowing faintly under the moonlight like a sleeping ember, waiting for breath. Though peace had seemingly returned to the village, though the children laughed again and the goats resumed their eternal war against fencing, no one mistook the calm for safety. They had seen too much. Baldric's return and Mildred's voice echoing through the well had changed things. Stories were no longer fables for restless toddlers. They were instructions, warnings, blueprints of survival. The villagers did not just gather yearly now, they gathered monthly. They brought offerings of memory, sketches of the spiral from each child's hand, pieces of the old church wall, lines of the lullaby that once lulled Baldric's children to sleep. But something shifted. It started with the crows. Not one or two, but dozens. They landed on rooftops, on fence posts, on the outer rings of the spiral garden. They didn't caw. They watched. Their eyes dark as polished obsidian, sharp and too still. Then came the dreams again. Not just for Mildred. Everyone. Children dreamed of forests that breathed and bled. Elders mumbled about stone hands rising from the fields. A farmer awoke screaming that his harvest was whispering the names of the forgotten. And the spiral? It glowed brighter, hotter. Not angry. Not yet, but alive. Mildred knew what it meant. Memory wasn't enough anymore. Something was stirring behind the door. Something vast and old and curious, and it wanted out. She walked through the village at dusk, her shawl wrapped tight, her footsteps echoing like distant drums. Her face remained calm, but inside, thunder. Baldric met her in the dream space, the place behind sleep between time. He stood beside the seal, unchanged. "You feel it too," she said. "Yes," he nodded, his voice the sound of wind over stone. The door dreams now. She approached the spiral etched in the stone beneath them. It shimmered beneath her feet. We stopped the forgetting, but that wasn't the only threat. "No," Baldric agreed. "Now it remembers us." Behind them, the seal shifted, not a crack, but a breath, a long inhale, like something gathering itself. Mildred turned sharply. "We need to wake the old guardians." Baldric's face darkened. "They sleep for a reason." "They sleep because they lost," she countered. "We need to finish what they couldn't." Back in the waking world, Mildred consulted the deepest texts, Father Thorn's forgotten scriptures, the ash-rubbed scrolls found in the back of the ruined church, a diary once hidden in a floorboard that reeked of wormwood and blood. They all spoke of the same thing, the Circle of Nine. Not warriors, not priests, witnesses, chosen not to fight the dark, but to watch it, to record its language. To anchor its truth in story so it could never be misinterpreted again. But they had vanished, or worse, been consumed. Mildred gathered 9 villagers. She didn't explain it fully. She didn't have to. They had seen the crows, felt the hum, heard the names in their dreams. The ritual was simple but ancient. Each would speak their name aloud into the spiral. Each would place something they loved into the earth. A child's drawing, a worn boot, a prayer whispered on a ribbon. When they finished, the wind changed. It no longer blew across the village, it circled. Spinning inward toward the spiral like breath around a candle's flame, the spiral flared. Each of the 9 collapsed, but only for a moment. When they stood, their eyes were changed. Not black, not glowing, just deep, as if they'd seen behind the veil and come back with secrets wedged between their ribs. They did not speak of what they saw. But from that night on, each one would sit in the center of the spiral once a week, in silence, facing outward, guarding nothing, watching everything. And when they spoke, it was in pairs, one word at a time, as if the truth had to be carried, not told, and the spiral pulsed with them. But even as the circle anchored the village, the world beyond did not sleep. Smoke was seen on the hills. Travelers passed through with eyes too wide and stories of wells gone dry in other towns, wells that had spirals etched on their stones, but none who remembered why. One man brought a book, bound in leather, covered in salt. He claimed it was written by a hand that had touched the other side. It had no title, Just one phrase, the spiral knows. When Mildred touched it, she saw herself, old, alone, standing in a field of ash, whispering a lullaby to a crack in the sky. She slammed the book shut, too soon. Not yet, but it was coming. The spiral was preparing them not for war, but for witnessing, for standing at the edge of something vast and unspeakable and naming it so that the world could remain real, because that was the true danger of the door. Not monsters, forgetfulness. If no one remembers what came before, then it never had to obey the same rules. The villagers did not sleep as soundly now, but they slept with purpose. The dreams continued. The dreams didn't stop. If anything, they multiplied, rippling outward like stones dropped into a still lake. Villagers began waking with foreign words on their tongues, markings on their skin in shapes they couldn't recall carving. One child drew an entire map in the soot of the hearth, eyes unfocused, humming the tune that only those touched by the spiral seemed to know. Mildred watched it unfold with a mixture of awe and dread. This was no longer about one village. The spiral had begun to spread, but not geographically, spiritually. It was winding its way into other stories, other places, seeding itself into folk tales and lullabies far beyond the valley. Travelers arrived with tattoos they couldn't remember getting, with songs in their heads about a door that watches, and a woman in a shawl whispering to the dark. Mildred knew they were losing control, not because the spiral was malevolent, but because it was hungry to be known, to be remembered, to be opened. The Circle of Nine took turns sitting inside the garden spiral, watching the stars, tracing their changing paths. They had become more than guardians, they were oracles. But with each passing week, they grew quieter, their eyes glazed further, their skin paled. One wept openly during a storm, whispering the sky cracked in the wrong direction, and the spiral pulsed with them like a heart learning a new rhythm. One night, during a midsummer gathering, a child vanished. Again, the third time this season. The village moved fast, organized, searching the fields, the woods, the riverbanks. No luck. And then as the moon hit its highest arc, the child reappeared at the center of the spiral, eyes wide, clutching a bundle of thorns and feathers, and speaking in the voice of someone long dead, Father Thorn. "They're listening now," the boy intoned, "but they are not understanding, Ananias. And when the spiral finishes its sentence, you must decide, read it aloud or bury it forever." Then he collapsed, unharmed but exhausted, the feathers turning to ash in his hands. No one slept that night. The next morning, Mildred stood before the well. She spoke plainly. "This village is no longer the center. The spiral has grown beyond us, and if it's dreaming of awakening, then someone must walk its path." The villagers waited. No one volunteered, until one of the nine stepped forward. Marn, the blacksmith's daughter. "I'll go," she said simply, her palms glowing faintly from weeks inside the spiral. Mildred nodded. They began the preparations immediately. Marn would undergo the walking, an ancient process found scrawled on the back cover of the salt-bound book. It required a fast of silence, a garment spun from memory, clothing given by those she loved, and 3 tokens, one of sorrow, one of joy, one of regret. She chose wisely. Sorrow, her father's hammer, split at the handle from the day he died. Joy, a music box that played the lullaby of the spiral. Regret, a letter she never sent, confessing her love to a friend who had vanished 2 winters ago. At dawn, Marn stood at the edge of the garden spiral, clothed in a patchwork of memory and purpose. The 9 circled her, chanting not words, but breaths. Rhythmic, synchronized, like lungs remembering how to exhale. Then she stepped forward and vanished. No flash of light, no rumble of earth, just gone. The spiral stopped pulsing, and for 3 days no one dreamed. When Marn returned, it was through the well, soaking wet, eyes full of stars. She collapsed into Mildred's arms and whispered, "It's writing." "What is?" "The spiral. It's not just a memory. It's a story. Ours. The door isn't a lock, it's a page." That night, Mildred consulted the salt-bound book once more. She finally saw it. The final chapter was blank. Waiting. That was the choice. Let the spiral finish its sentence, see what lay on the next page, or bury the book, live within the safety of a story with no end. But the village had never been about safety. It was about truth, so they prepared. Again, a final gathering was called. The 9 formed a circle. Marn stood in the center, and Mildred spoke the first words of the spiral aloud. The well cracked, not from damage, from opening, and light poured out, not white, golden, Like ink spilled across a parchment too sacred for mortal hands, shapes moved inside, not monsters, not angels, just possibility. And then a hand emerged, not to take, to offer. Baldrick's smiling, Mildred stepped forward, took it, and the spiral turned one last time. Not to trap, to finish. The sentence was complete, and the world began again, remembering everything. The spiral had spoken. Not in words, not in thunder, but in something deeper. A resonance that hummed in the bones of the village, in the roots of the trees, in the stars that blinked knowingly overhead. The door had opened, not to unleash chaos, but to reveal a truth long forgotten. The spiral was not a trap, but a path. Mildred stood at the center of the garden, the charred spiral beneath her feet now glowing with a gentle golden light. Around her, the villagers gathered, their faces illuminated by the soft luminescence that pulsed from the earth. Children clutched their parents' hands, elders leaned on canes, and the circle of 9 stood in silent vigil, their eyes reflecting the spiral's glow. "We've been afraid," Mildred began, her voice steady. "Afraid of forgetting, of remembering, of what lies beyond the door. But the spiral teaches us that life is not a straight line. It's a cycle, a journey that wins and turns, leading us back to ourselves." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a collective exhale of understanding. They had been so focused on sealing the door, on keeping the darkness at bay, that they had forgotten the purpose of the spiral: to guide, to transform, to connect. In the days that followed, the village transformed. The spiral became a symbol not of fear, but of unity. They etched it into doorways, wove it into tapestries, and painted it onto the walls of their homes. Children learned its meaning alongside their letters, and elders shared stories of its power and purpose. The well, once a place of dread, became a sanctuary. Villagers gathered there to meditate, to reflect, to listen. The water, once still and silent, now shimmered with a light that seemed to come from within. It was as if the spiral had awakened something in the land itself, a memory, a song, a heartbeat. But with awakening came responsibility. The spiral's reach extended beyond the village, touching neighboring towns and distant lands. Travelers arrived, drawn by dreams and whispers, seeking the source of the spiral's call. They brought stories of their own spirals, symbols carved into ancient stones, patterns found in nature, tales passed down through generations. Mildred welcomed them, listening to their stories, sharing the village's journey. She realized that the spiral was not unique to their village. It was a universal symbol, a thread that connected all of humanity. In the spiral, they found common ground, a shared language of transformation and growth. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village, a young girl approached Mildred. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity, and in her hands she held a small spiral-shaped shell. "I found this by the river," she said, offering it to Mildred. "Is it part of the spiral too?" Mildred took the shell, feeling its smooth curves beneath her fingers. She smiled, kneeling to meet the girl's gaze. "Yes," she said, "the spiral is everywhere, in the shells, in the stars, in our hearts. It's a reminder that we're all connected, that every ending is a new beginning." The girl beamed, clutching the shell to her chest. "Then I'll keep it safe," she declared. Mildred watched her run off, the shell gleaming in the fading light. She felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The spiral had taught them to remember, to connect, to grow, and now it was teaching them to hope. As night fell, the village gathered once more around the spiral. They sang songs of old and new, their voices weaving together in harmony. The spiral pulsed beneath them, a living testament to their journey. And above, the stars twinkled in approval, their light forming spirals of their own across the sky. The journey was far from over, but they were no longer afraid. With the spiral as their guide, they would continue to grow, to transform, to remember. For in the spiral they had found not just a symbol, but a way of life. The village was quiet now, in a way that made the air feel thick, the kind of quiet that settled deep into the bones like something ancient, something forgotten, was stirring again, just beneath the surface. The spiral remained, carved into the earth, glowing faintly with a soft pulse that no one quite understood, but everyone could feel. It had been months since Marn had walked through it, since the villagers had gathered to complete the ritual, since the door behind the well had been closed. But the tension never fully lifted. The air felt charged, as if it was waiting for something. Mildred often stood at the edge of the garden now, where the spiral was marked into the ground. It had become a living thing, its presence woven into the village, just as the memory of Baldric had been. She would stand there for hours, watching the soft flicker of light as the village continued its slow, steady rhythm around her. The children played nearby, oblivious to the weight in the air, while the adults carried on with their chores, but all of them knew the world felt different. The spiral had not fully let go of them. Every now and then the pulse would thrum just a little louder, like the beat of a distant drum, echoing across the village. The winds would pick up, not in gusts but in soft whispers, as though the very earth was breathing in time with the heart of the spiral. And in those moments, Mildred would close her eyes and listen, not just to the wind or the pulse, but to the feeling that stirred within her. It was something she couldn't place, something between dread and hope. One evening, as twilight draped its soft blanket over the world, Mildred sat beside the well, tracing the edges of the spiral with her fingers. The well had remained quiet for weeks now, no more strange hums, no more voices. It was as if the earth itself had fallen into a deep slumber, one that neither time nor memory could shake. But tonight, the silence felt different. The wind changed direction. It carried with it a scent, sharp and unfamiliar. Something sweet, like burnt sugar. Then came the hum, a low, vibrating note, one that seemed to wrap around her chest, tightening, pressing down. It was so soft at first, so quiet, but it was unmistakable. The door had stirred. Mildred stood quickly, her pulse quickening, as though the well itself had woken from a long, restless sleep. She could feel it now, the pressure beneath her feet, the weight in the air. The spiral, its glow pulsing just beneath the surface of the earth, was alive again. Her mind flashed back to the rituals, to the warnings, to the choices made to seal the door. It wasn't over. Not yet. The villagers gathered slowly, drawn by the strange hum. They'd felt it too, the thrum beneath their feet, the shift in the wind. Fear bloomed in their hearts, the same fear they had carried since the first whispers of the spiral, the first stirrings of the door. They had sealed it once, but now it seemed the spiral was calling them again. But this time, they weren't sure what it wanted. They had changed. They were no longer just the villagers from before. They were witnesses, guardians. But of what? Mildred stepped forward, the villagers parting for her, their eyes wide with silent questions. She could feel their collective fear, but more than that, she could feel their uncertainty. They had not been prepared for this. None of them had. "Gather the circle," she said quietly. "We need to remember what was left behind." They didn't ask questions, they knew what she meant. The circle of 9 was needed again, their bond to the spiral unbroken. They formed a ring around the well, their hands held high, their voices barely a whisper, but strong enough to carry into the night. And then it came, a voice, faint but clear, from beneath the earth. The spiral does not forget, and neither should you. It echoed through the village, vibrating in the bones of every living thing. The well itself seemed to tremble, and for a moment the villagers froze, as if the earth itself were shifting beneath their feet. The wind howled, twisting through the trees, the air growing thick with energy, as if something was reaching out, clawing for release. Mildred's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't move. The villagers stayed still, waiting, listening. They were no longer afraid in the same way they had been before. Now it was different. This wasn't about protecting themselves. This was about understanding, about facing what had been left unsaid, what had been buried. And in that moment, they knew it was coming for them. Not with force, but with the pull of memory. The hum grew louder, not just from the well, but from the earth itself. The villagers could feel it now, beneath their feet, in the air, in the thrum of their own hearts. The spiral was alive, remembering. The stories, the fears, the choices made, they had all led to this moment. But they didn't know yet how it would end. Mildred's voice cut through the stillness. "It's not a curse," she said. "It's a choice. We are the ones who can decide whether we bury it again or we face it together." The wind picked up again, sharper now, the hum turning into a low, continuous vibration. The village seemed to shake under the weight of it, but Mildred stood firm, her eyes locked on the well. And then it happened. A figure emerged from the depths, slowly, as if taking shape from the dark itself. Tall, shimmering, not quite human, but not entirely other. The figure stepped from the well, its form flickering like candlelight. It was Baldric, but not. His eyes glowed, not with recognition, but with something deeper, something older, something tied to the earth itself. "We remember," he said, his voice deep and resonating, not just in their ears, but in their bones. "The spiral is not a prison, it is a path, and now it leads here, into the next." Mildred stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you want?" Baldric's figure shifted, the air around him shimmering. "To remind you, the spiral has always been a bridge between worlds. And now, the bridge calls to you. Will you cross it?" Mildred felt the weight of the question. The village had already crossed a threshold, but this was different. The ground trembled once more, and she knew this was no longer just about guarding or sealing the door. It was about stepping forward into something new. She turned to the villagers. "It's our choice," she said. "We remember, and we decide whether we carry on or face what comes next." The spiral pulsed beneath her feet. The wind screamed in her ears, and Mildred took a step forward. The village stood at a precipice. The wind had picked up again, sweeping across the field like the whispers of those who had passed long ago. It carried with it the weight of all that had happened, all that had been buried, and all that had been lost. The villagers, gathered in a circle around the well, could feel it now, the energy in the air, thick and heavy with an unsettling kind of anticipation. Mildred's heart pounded in her chest, each beat syncing with the pulse of the spiral beneath her feet. The figure of Baldric, the one who had sacrificed everything, the one who had stood between them and the darkness, was standing there before her, but he was no longer the man she had known. He was something else, something more. His form flickered like candlelight, casting shadows that stretched beyond the well. His eyes, glowing with an eerie light, seemed to see beyond the village, beyond the earth itself. He was a part of it now, something connected to the land, to the spiral. The gateway had opened and he had stepped through, but this was not the Baldric she had loved. The villagers were silent, each one of them feeling the weight of the choice before them. Some trembled, others stood still, frozen in place as they tried to understand the figure in front of them, the being that had once been one of them. The hum of the spiral still lingered in the air, a low, vibrating hum that felt like the earth itself was breathing. But what was it breathing for? "Baldric?" Mildred's voice cracked as she spoke, unsure whether she was addressing the man she had known or the entity that now stood before her. The figure of Baldric shifted, the air around him warping with his movement. "I am still him, and I am not," he replied, his voice like the sound of thunder rolling over the hills. "The spiral connects us all, and now it is me. But it is not just me, Mildred, it is all of us." The villagers looked at each other, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Some stepped back, unsure whether to run, to hide, or to accept. The choice that had once seemed so distant, the choice between forgetting and remembering, was now laid bare before them. The path ahead was unclear, and Mildred could feel the weight of it in her very bones. She had thought they were done, that the spiral had been sealed, that the threat had passed. But this was something different. "What do you mean?" Mildred asked, her voice steady despite the rising tide of panic in her chest. "What do you want from us?" "I don't want anything from you," Baldric's figure replied, his eyes softening, though the light in them never dimmed. "But the spiral needs you, Mildred. The world needs you." The wind howled around them, swirling in a vortex that seemed to pull at their very souls. Mildred looked up at the sky, the clouds swirling in a chaotic dance, and she knew, deep down, that the world was changing. That the spiral was not just a force that had touched their village. It had touched everything, and it was calling them to remember, to witness, to face what had always been hidden. "You have to decide," Baldric continued, his voice growing more urgent. "Will you turn away? Let the spiral fade into memory, let the world forget, or will you embrace it, step into the unknown, and carry the weight of what's coming?" The ground beneath them trembled, a low rumble that reverberated in their bones. Mildred felt the pressure in the air like the world was holding its breath, waiting for their decision. The spiral pulsed again, brighter now, as if it too was waiting. The villagers looked to her, to the one who had stood at the center of all this, the one who had always kept them together. They needed her to decide. And yet, Mildred didn't know what the right choice was. She couldn't know. She could feel the pull of the spiral, the call to remember, to understand what lay beyond, to step forward into the unknown. But there was fear, too. Fear of what would happen if they opened the door fully. Fear of what would come spilling out if they allowed the spiral to complete its sentence. But in the silence, in the weight of the moment, Mildred realized something. The fear was necessary. Without it, they would never truly understand the power of the spiral. They would never know the value of what they had been guarding, of what they had been protecting. The spiral wasn't a curse, it was a reminder of what they had forgotten, of the stories lost to time. And now it was offering them a chance to remember, to rise above the fear, and to create the story of their future. She stepped forward, her heart steady now, her mind clear. The villagers watched as she approached the center of the spiral, the place where Baldric had once stood, where he had held the world back. She didn't hesitate. She placed her hands on the earth, feeling the hum beneath her fingertips, the pulse of the spiral coursing through her. "We remember," she whispered, her voice rising with the wind. "We remember all of it. The past, the present, the future." The spiral beneath her feet flared brightly, the light filling the village, the land, the sky. It was not just a light, it was a force of memory, a force of connection. And in that moment, Mildred knew that the choice was no longer just about them. It was about the world. The spiral was not a barrier to be broken. It was a thread to be woven, connecting everything, binding them together in ways they could never have imagined. She turned to the villagers. "We are no longer afraid," she said, her voice strong, full of the confidence she had never thought she would have. "We stand together, and we face the future." The wind howled, the earth trembled, but the spiral held steady beneath them, and they knew, together, that the world would be different, that it had already changed. But they would face it, together, to the end. The world had changed, not in an obvious way, not overnight, but it had shifted, like the earth itself was rotating on an unseen axis. The pulse of the spiral beneath the village had quieted for a moment, as though it too was taking a deep breath. The light that had once illuminated the well now hummed quietly, gently, and the air felt thick with both anticipation and something else, something undefined, like a promise made long ago, before even the first breath of time had been taken. Mildred stood at the center of the spiral, her heart beating steadily, her hands pressed to the earth, feeling the hum beneath her palms. The ground was warm now, not like it had been before, cold, hesitant, like it was holding its breath. But now it was different. It had woken. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the feeling. The village had gathered once more, but this time they were not afraid. No, the fear had been replaced by something else, a kind of solemnity, a kind of reverence. They understood now. They understood what it meant to face the spiral, to remember. The villagers were still, watching her, waiting for the next step, for the next command. She could feel their eyes on her, but she knew what they were thinking, what they felt. They weren't just waiting for her, they were waiting for the truth. "We remember," Mildred said again, louder this time, and the air seemed to vibrate with her words. The wind picked up, swirling around her, carrying with it the weight of years, of stories that had been buried too deep, of memories that had been lost, and the spiral responded, its pulse quickening, glowing brighter beneath her feet. But it wasn't just the spiral that responded, it was the earth, the sky, the very fabric of the world. In that moment, she knew. The spiral had always been there. It had always been part of them. Part of the land, part of the story. But they had been blind. They had sealed it away, forgotten its purpose. They had chosen silence instead of remembering. But now the door had opened, and they had been given a choice. The world was waiting. The wind died down, and the village fell into a heavy silence. The tension in the air was palpable, but it was not fear. It was something else. A weight of responsibility, a deep understanding of what they had to do next. Mildred could feel the villagers' eyes on her, their thoughts pressing into her like the weight of an entire history. They were ready, but were they ready enough? "Do you remember?" she asked, her voice a challenge, her eyes scanning the gathered crowd. "Do you remember who we are?" The silence stretched on, but then slowly, one by one, the villagers nodded. They remembered. They remembered the old ways, the stories their grandparents had told them. They remembered the wisdom that had been passed down in whispers. They remembered the land, the spirits, the things that had been sealed away in the name of safety, of protection. They remembered the price they had paid for their ignorance. "We are guardians," Mildred said, as if confirming it to herself, "but we are also witnesses to the spiral, to the stories, to the land, and we cannot turn away from what we've been given. We cannot pretend that we did not hear the call." She stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the village, over the people who had once been afraid of the spiral, but now stood ready to embrace it. They were no longer the same people who had sealed the door. They had been changed by the journey, by the spiral's pulse, by their shared remembering. "We can no longer be passive," she said firmly, her voice carrying in the stillness of the night. "The spiral calls us to act, not to fight, but to remember, to stand as witnesses to what has been buried and forgotten." The villagers murmured among themselves, and Mildred could feel their resolve solidifying. They weren't just following her, they were standing alongside her. They were taking up the mantle. The weight of the spiral, of the earth, of the unseen forces that had shaped their lives for centuries, it was all laid out before them now. One of the elders, a woman named Agnes, stepped forward. She was old, her back bent with years of hard labor, but her eyes were sharp, keen with the wisdom that came from a life spent listening to the land. "We remember," Agnes said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "We remember the old ways, and we remember the price of forgetting. But we are not afraid anymore." Mildred met her gaze. It was the truth. The fear had been stripped away. They knew the risks, but they also knew the stakes. They could no longer hide from the spiral like from the door. They had to move forward, to unseal the door within themselves and face what lay on the other side. And so they did. They didn't open the door. Not physically, not in the way they had before, when the well had gurgled and churned with strange energy. Instead, they opened themselves. Mildred turned back to the spiral, her hands resting lightly on its edges, and she closed her eyes. "We witness," she whispered. "We remember. We are not afraid. We are the ones who will carry this forward." The pulse of the spiral quickened beneath her hands. It wasn't violent, it wasn't sudden, but it was undeniable. The earth beneath them hummed, the wind began to rise again, and the stars above seemed to flare in response, as if they too were listening. Mildred stepped back, and the villagers followed suit, creating a circle around the garden, around the spiral. They weren't closing the door. They were opening it to something new, a world that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be remembered. And as they stood there, the earth beneath them shifted, not in a violent upheaval, but in a slow, deliberate movement. The pulse of the spiral slowed, and for the first time in years, the village felt calm. Not empty, not void of life, but full. The world wasn't ending, it was beginning again. And this time, they were ready to face it, to witness it, to remember, to be continued. The village was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Not just in the sense of fields of grain growing tall or children laughing through their days, but alive in a deeper, more visceral sense. The pulse of the spiral beneath their feet had spread, its energy now a hum that vibrated through the very soil, up through the grass, into the hearts of every villager. It wasn't the same feeling as before. Before, it had been a quiet dread, an underlying fear that something they didn't fully understand was lurking, watching, waiting. Now it was different. There was a vibrancy to it, a vitality that hummed with both caution and promise. Mildred stood at the edge of the garden once more, her hands pressed lightly to the earth. The spiral beneath her glowed, faint but undeniable, as though it were calling to the stars themselves, urging them to listen. The sky above had shifted as well, the clouds breaking apart, revealing constellations that had not been visible in the years of thick mist. The night was clear, and in the distance the mountains loomed like silent sentinels, their peaks cutting through the sky like ancient, jagged knives. There was no longer a need for a wall between the village and the world outside. The villagers had embraced the spiral in a way they never thought possible. The fear that had once gripped their hearts, that had kept them locked inside their little village, had melted away. Now, there was a sense of openness, a willingness to listen, to learn, to remember what had been hidden for so long. Mildred turned, scanning the faces of the villagers who had gathered once again. This time they weren't afraid. No, Now they were unified by something else: purpose. They understood the importance of what they had done, what they had awakened. They had crossed the threshold, and there was no turning back. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked softly, her eyes settling on Agnes, who stood a few steps away. The elder had been quiet for the past few days, her weathered face contemplative as she watched the spiral pulse in the center of the village. Mildred had seen the change in her, the same change that had occurred in everyone. Fear was replaced with understanding. Agnes nodded, her eyes bright with an intensity that hadn't been there before. "I feel it, Mildred. The land is speaking again, not just to us, but to the world. It remembers, and it's teaching us to remember too." The words struck something deep within Mildred, something that had been gnawing at her ever since the night they had spoken the words aloud, the words that had begun to unlock something hidden within the spiral. She had known it was more than a door, more than just a well or a symbol. It was a force, an entity, a bridge between worlds. But now, it was clear, the spiral was not just a passage for them to walk through. It was a living part of them. It was a part of their history, their future. It was a path that they would continue to walk long after the well had sealed itself, long after the door had been closed. The wind picked up, sweeping through the trees with a low, mournful sound, as if the earth itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The sound was not one of fear anymore. It was a release, a freedom. And yet, despite the clarity of the moment, Mildred knew that this peace was fragile. The door had been sealed, yes, but not shut. There was still a space, a crack between the worlds, and it could never truly be sealed if the people didn't understand it, if they didn't remember. She turned back to the spiral, feeling its pulse beneath her hands, stronger now than ever before. "What do we do next?" Marn's voice broke the silence. She had emerged from the circle of villagers, her eyes steady, though her voice trembled just slightly with uncertainty. She had taken the step forward once before, and now she was ready to take another. Mildred smiled at her, a small, knowing smile. "We walk the path." The words hung in the air for a moment, heavier than they seemed. Marn stepped closer, kneeling at the edge of the spiral, touching the earth with her palm. "But the world is different now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do we walk into the unknown?" "We don't walk into the unknown, Marn," Mildred replied, her voice stronger now. "We walk into what is already known. We walk into the memory of the world. The world has always been here. It's always been waiting for us to remember." A murmur rippled through the crowd, as if Mildred's words had struck a chord deep within them, pulling on something they hadn't realized was there. Something dormant, something forgotten. For a long while, no one spoke. The wind continued to hum, and the stars above seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the earth itself. Mildred could feel it now in the pit of her stomach, in the weight of the air around her. The spiral was not just about the village, not just about the door, it was about the world. The spiral connected them all. The past, the present, the future. It was the story of everything that had been and everything that would be. The people of the village stood together, bound by a shared understanding. They didn't know what the future would hold, what awaited them beyond the horizon, but they were no longer afraid. They had faced the spiral, and they had chosen to remember. They had chosen to stand, not in fear, but in unity. "Tonight we remember," Mildred said, her voice strong and steady. "Tonight we honor what has been and what is yet to come." The villagers gathered around the spiral, their hands pressed to the earth, their voices rising in a soft chant. It was not a song, but a prayer of remembrance, a prayer of unity. And as they chanted, the earth beneath them stirred, not violently, but with purpose. The spiral glowed brighter, its pulse quickening as the land responded to their words. The wind howled around them, the trees bending in response, as though the very world itself was listening. Mildred felt it then, an understanding that had eluded her until now. The spiral was not just a path for them to walk, it was a promise. And that promise was not to the village alone, it was to the earth, to the world, to the future. The village was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Not just in the sense of fields of grain growing tall or children laughing through their days, but alive in a deeper, more visceral sense. The pulse of the spiral beneath their feet had spread, its energy now a hum that vibrated through the very soil, up through the grass into the hearts of every villager. It wasn't the same feeling as before. Before, it had been a quiet dread, like an underlying fear that something they didn't fully understand was lurking, watching, waiting. Now it was different. There was a vibrancy to it, a vitality that hummed with both caution and promise. Mildred stood at the edge of the garden once more, her hands pressed lightly to the earth. The spiral beneath her glowed, faint but undeniable, as though it were calling to the stars themselves, urging them to listen. The sky above had shifted as well, the clouds breaking apart, revealing constellations that had not been visible in the years of thick mist. The night was clear, and in the distance the mountains loomed like silent sentinels, their peaks cutting through the sky like ancient, jagged knives. There was no longer a need for a wall between the village and the world outside. The villagers had embraced the spiral in a way they never thought possible. The fear that had once gripped their hearts, that had kept them locked inside their little village, had melted away. Now there was a sense of openness, a willingness to listen, to learn, to remember what had been hidden for so long. Mildred turned, scanning the faces of the villagers who had gathered once again. This time, they weren't afraid. No, now they were unified by something else, purpose. They understood the importance of what they had done, what they had awakened. They had crossed the threshold, and there was no turning back. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked softly, her eyes settling on Agnes, who stood a few steps away. The elder had been quiet for the past few days, her weathered face contemplative as she watched the spiral pulse in the center of the village. Mildred had seen the change in her, the same change that had occurred in everyone. Fear was replaced with understanding. Agnes nodded, her eyes bright with an intensity that hadn't been there before. "I feel it, Mildred. The land is speaking again, not just to us, but to the world. It remembers, and it's teaching us to remember too." The words struck something deep within Mildred, something that had been gnawing at her ever since the night they had spoken the words aloud, the words that had begun to unlock something hidden within the spiral. She had known it was more than a door, more than just a well or a symbol. It was a force, an entity, a bridge between worlds. But now it was clear. The spiral was not just a passage for them to walk through. It was a living part of them. It was a part of their history, their future. It was a path that they would continue to walk long after the well had sealed itself, long after the door had been closed. The wind picked up, sweeping through the trees with a low, mournful sound, as if the earth itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The sound was not one of fear anymore. It was a release, a freedom. And yet, despite the clarity of the moment, Mildred knew that this peace was fragile. The door had been sealed, yes, but not shut. There was still a space, a crack between the worlds, and it could never truly be sealed if the people didn't understand it, if they didn't remember. She turned back to the spiral, feeling its pulse beneath her hands, stronger now than ever before. "What do we do next?" Marn's voice broke the silence. She had emerged from the circle of villagers, her eyes steady, though her voice trembled just slightly with uncertainty. She had taken the step forward once before, and now she was ready to take another. Mildred smiled at her, a small, knowing smile. "We walk the path." The words hung in the air for a moment, heavier than they seemed. Marn stepped closer, kneeling at the edge of the spiral, touching the earth with her palm. "But the world is different now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do we walk into the unknown?" "We don't walk into the unknown, Marn," Mildred replied, her voice stronger now. "We walk into what is already known. We walk into the memory of the world. The world has always been here. It's always been waiting for us to remember." A murmur rippled through the crowd, as if Mildred's words had struck a chord deep within them, pulling on something they hadn't realized was there, something dormant, something forgotten. For a long while, no one spoke. The wind continued to hum, and the stars above seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the earth itself. Mildred could feel it now, in the pit of her stomach, in the weight of the air around her. The spiral was not just about the village, not just about the door, it was about the world. The spiral connected them all, the past, the present, the future. It was the story of everything that had been and everything that would be. The people of the village stood together, bound by a shared understanding. They didn't know what the future would hold, what awaited them beyond the horizon, but they were no longer afraid. They had faced the spiral and they had chosen to remember. They had chosen to stand, not in fear, but in unity. Tonight, we remember, Mildred said, her voice strong and steady. Tonight, we honor what has been and what is yet to come. The villagers gathered around the spiral, their hands pressed to the earth, their voices rising in a soft chant. It was not a song, but a prayer of remembrance, a prayer of unity. And as they chanted, the earth beneath them stirred, not violently, but with purpose. The spiral glowed brighter, its pulse quickening as the land responded to their words. The wind howled around them, the trees bending in response, as though the very world itself was listening. Mildred felt it then, an understanding that had eluded her until now. The spiral was not just a path for them to walk, it was a promise. And that promise was not to the village alone. It was to the earth, to the world, to the future. The village had not just crossed a threshold, it had been transformed. What had once been a sleepy, isolated place, hidden away behind the hills and protected by the veil of the spiral, was now alive with possibility. The crack in the well had not just revealed light, it had unlocked something in the very fabric of their world, something they could no longer deny, no longer ignore. Mildred stood at the edge of the well, her hands still pressed to the earth, the pulse of the spiral reverberating through her fingertips. The air around her hummed with energy, and she could feel the weight of it, the pull of it, as if it was beckoning them all to step deeper into the unknown. But this time they weren't afraid. No, they were ready. The fear had been shed, replaced by something else, a quiet, resolute understanding that they had become part of something much bigger than themselves. Do you feel that? Marn's voice broke through Mildred's thoughts, soft but intense. She had stepped beside her, her eyes searching the horizon as if looking for some sign of what was to come. It's as if the earth is breathing with us. Mildred nodded, not needing to answer because she felt it too. The land was alive. It was speaking, not in words, but in a language deeper than any they had ever known. It was the sound of ancient memories, of things forgotten, of promises made and broken. And it was calling them to remember, to understand the full scope of what they had awoken. The villagers were still gathered around the well, their faces a mix of awe and trepidation. They had all felt the hum, the pulse, the call of the spiral, and now, standing here, they knew this was no longer about sealing doors or keeping the darkness at bay. No, the time for hiding was over. The spiral had drawn them together, had connected them to a force that stretched far beyond the boundaries of their village, far beyond their understanding. Mildred turned to face them, her voice steady, her heart clear. "We are the witnesses now," she said, "not just to the spiral, but to the world that has been waiting. It has been sealed for too long, but now, we are the ones who must open the door to the future." The villagers exchanged uncertain glances, but there was no fear in their eyes now. There was resolve. They had seen what the spiral could do, had felt the power that hummed beneath their feet. The door had been cracked open, but it had not been fully revealed. And they had been chosen to bear witness, to walk this path, even though they did not yet know where it would lead. Baldric's figure flickered beside her, and Mildred could feel his presence beside her, his spirit still lingering, still guiding them. He was not just a memory anymore. He was part of the land, part of the pulse of the spiral. They had opened the door, yes, but they had also opened themselves to something else, a deeper understanding of the world and its connection to them. "Is it time?" Marn asked, her voice steady now, the uncertainty gone. She had come into her own in the wake of all this, no longer the timid girl who had once feared the spiral. She had stepped forward, just like the rest of them. They had all stepped forward. Mildred nodded. "Yes, it's time." She stepped to the center of the well, her hands raised to the sky, and the villagers followed her lead. Together, they stood there, facing the well, feeling the earth beneath them shift and pulse in time with their hearts. The wind howled around them again, but this time it was not an omen of destruction. It was a herald of something new. "We opened the door," Mildred whispered, the words falling from her lips like a prayer. She didn't need to speak loudly. She didn't need to demand anything. The earth was already listening, already waiting for them to move forward. And so they did. The ground trembled beneath their feet, not with violence, but with anticipation. The pulse of the spiral quickened, the light growing brighter, more intense. The well before them cracked open wider, revealing the swirling depths within. The air felt charged, as though the earth was holding its breath, waiting for them to take that final step. And then it happened. The light from the well spilled out like liquid gold, cascading over them, enveloping them in a soft, radiant glow. It wasn't blinding, but it was undeniable. It was not a light from the sun or the stars, it was a light that came from within. The light of the spiral, the light of the land itself. Mildred stood still, her eyes closed, her hands outstretched as the light washed over her. She could feel it now deep within her bones, in the very marrow of her being. The earth was breathing with them. The spiral was not just a door, it was a bond, a connection that linked them all together, stretching across time, across space, across dimensions. It was a path that led from the past to the future, from the earth to the stars, from the known to the unknown. And Mildred understood. This was the next step. This was not an end, but a beginning. The spiral had opened a path for them, but it was up to them to walk it. They were no longer passive observers in the world. They were active participants in its unfolding story. They were the witnesses, yes, but they were also the creators. She turned to face the villagers, her heart swelling with pride, with purpose. "The door is open," she said, her voice strong, clear. "The future is waiting for us, and we will face it together." The villagers stepped forward, their hands reaching for the light that poured from the well. One by one, they touched it, felt it flow through their veins, through their souls. It was not just energy, it was memory. It was the past and the future, woven together in a single thread, and they were part of it. They had always been part of it. And so, with the light of the spiral illuminating their faces, they walked forward into the unknown, together. For the first time, they were not afraid. For the first time, they were ready. The door had opened, and they had crossed through. The light from the well had enveloped them, but it wasn't just the light that filled the village. It was everything. It was the air, the soil, the sky itself. There was a hum that resonated deep in their chests, a sound that wasn't coming from their ears, but from within them, as though the very fabric of the world was vibrating with the pulse of the spiral. Mildred stood at the center, her arms raised high, feeling the warmth of the light cascading down upon her. It was both exhilarating and overwhelming. The energy thrummed around her, pulling at her senses, urging her to step forward, to embrace the unknown that lay just beyond the veil. The village was with her, each villager bathed in the same golden light, each one touched by the same energy that flowed from the well, that connected them all. The ground beneath them was no longer solid in the way they had always known it. The earth seemed to shift, as if it were becoming something else. The pulse of the spiral was no longer just a hum, it was a rhythm, like the heartbeat of the land itself. And Mildred knew, deep within her, that the world was changing, shifting into something new, something bigger than any of them had ever imagined. "Do you feel it?" Marn's voice broke through the silence. She was standing beside Mildred now, her face bathed in the glow, her eyes wide with both awe and uncertainty. "It's like the earth is breathing with us, like it's alive." Mildred nodded, her breath steady but her heart racing. "It is alive," she replied softly. "The spiral is more than just a path. It's a connection to everything, to the earth, to the sky, to each other. And now it's leading us somewhere we've always been meant to go." The villagers stood together, unified in their awe, their gaze fixed on the well, where the light was now pouring freely into the world. They were no longer just witnesses to the spiral's power. They were participants. They had crossed the threshold, and now they stood on the cusp of something much greater. But the light was not the only thing that stirred. There was a pull, a gravitational force, drawing them inward, pulling them closer to the well. Mildred could feel it, too, deep within her bones, in her very soul. The earth was shifting, responding to the light, to the power that had been released. And then, it happened. The ground beneath their feet cracked open. It wasn't violent. There were no explosions, no tremors. It was a gentle, almost reverent opening, as if the earth itself was revealing something that had been buried for eons. The crack widened slowly, revealing a shimmering portal beneath them, pulsing with light. The villagers gasped, stepping back instinctively, unsure of what lay beyond. The portal beckoned them, drawing them in with an undeniable force. Mildred's heart hammered in her chest, but she stood still, her eyes fixed on the portal. She could hear the whispers now, soft and distant, carried on the wind. The voices of the past, of the forgotten ones, calling to her. The spiral had awakened something deep within the earth, something that had been waiting for this moment, for the opening of the door. She felt its call in every part of her being, in every fiber of her soul. The villagers began to step forward, drawn toward the crack in the earth, their eyes wide with both fear and wonder. No one spoke. They didn't need to. They all understood, all felt the same pull. They had been waiting for this, whether they knew it or not. This was the next step. The spiral had opened the door, and now it was time to walk through it. Mildred turned to face them, her voice calm but firm. "We must go through," she said. "The world is waiting for us on the other side." They didn't question her. They had come this far, had seen the light, had felt the earth breathe beneath their feet. Now it was time to walk the path. Marn stepped forward first, her eyes fixed on the portal. "We do this together," she said, her voice strong, filled with the same certainty that Mildred had felt when she had first spoken the words aloud. The spiral had connected them all, had bound them together in a way that no force could break. One by one, the villagers stepped toward the portal, their hands reaching for the light, their hearts steady. Mildred followed them, her breath steady as she crossed the threshold. The moment her foot passed the crack in the earth, the world around her shifted. The light grew brighter, blinding in its intensity, but instead of blinding her, it filled her. It didn't burn, it illuminated. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded. Mildred found herself standing in a vast, endless landscape. The sky stretched on forever, filled with stars that seemed closer than they should have been. The land beneath her feet was soft like moss, but it hummed with energy. She felt it beneath her skin, vibrating through the soles of her feet, into her veins, into her very soul. This was where the spiral had been leading them. The place beyond the veil, beyond the world they had known. And yet, she was not alone. And the villagers were there with her, each one standing in awe, their faces illuminated by the light of the stars. Their eyes were wide with wonder, but they stood together, unified. The spiral had not just opened the door to another world, it had opened the door to themselves, to their true selves, to the land, to the stars, to the universe. "This is where we belong," Mildred whispered, her voice full of awe. And it was true. They had always belonged here. This had always been their path. The spiral was not just a symbol. It was a bridge to the future, to the past, to the present. It was the thread that connected them to the universe. They stood together, hand in hand, as the light of the stars above them shone brighter, and the hum of the earth beneath them pulsed with the rhythm of life. This was the beginning of a new world. The landscape before them stretched out endlessly, vast and beautiful in ways that words could scarcely capture. It was as if the veil between worlds had not just been lifted, but had disintegrated altogether, revealing a realm that existed not as a mere place, but as a living, breathing entity. The air hummed with energy, pure, ancient, and untouched. Mildred stood at the forefront of the group, her eyes scanning the horizon, trying to make sense of what lay before them. The stars overhead gleamed like diamonds, suspended in a deep indigo sky, and the ground beneath them vibrated with an energy that was both comforting and unsettling. The villagers stood behind her, silent for the most part, their faces illuminated by the celestial light that bathed them. It was a strange comfort, and yet a profound weight. They had crossed over into a new world, one that had always existed just beyond their understanding, but now they were in it. The spiral had led them here, this place beyond the door they had opened, and Mildred felt both awe and fear creeping up her spine. The unknown stretched out like an ocean before them, vast, uncharted, and infinite. "What is this place?" Marn's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 1,000 questions. She stepped beside Mildred, her eyes wide with wonder, her hands clenched at her sides. "It doesn't feel like anything I've ever known." Mildred took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She didn't have the answers, not yet, but she could feel the truth of it deep in her chest, settling like a fire. "I think it's what's always been here, just waiting for us to remember." The land seemed to respond to her words. The pulse beneath the earth grew stronger, vibrating through her body, a constant hum that matched the beat of her heart. The air around them shifted, as though the land itself was listening, adjusting to their presence, inviting them deeper into its fold. The world was alive in ways that defied comprehension. It wasn't simply a place, it was a force, a presence that connected all things, all time, all life. Baldric's form flickered beside her, just on the edge of her vision. She didn't need to look directly at him to know he was there. His presence had become a constant in the village, in her own life. It was a reminder of their past, but it was also a connection to something greater. She had felt him when the spiral first opened, and now he was with them, even as they walked this new path. The villagers shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. Their questions were still there, unspoken, but heavy in the air. How had they gotten here? Why had the spiral called them? What now? Mildred could sense the uncertainty, the hesitance that clung to the edges of their resolve. But there was something else too. It was a flicker, something that had sparked within them when the door first cracked open. They were ready. They had to be. "We've come this far," Mildred said, turning to face the group. Her voice was calm, but it carried a certainty that surprised even her. "And we're not turning back." Marn stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "But what do we do now? What are we supposed to do in this place?" Mildred considered her question. The world stretched out before them, but it wasn't the world they had known. It was something else entirely. The portal they had crossed had not just moved them to a different place, it had moved them to a different time, or maybe a different version of time altogether. The rules that had governed their lives, their village, their world, they didn't seem to apply here. And yet there was a profound sense of rightness. It was as if they had always been meant to walk this path, to reach this place. "I don't know what we're supposed to do," Mildred admitted, her voice soft. "But I know we're not here by mistake. The spiral opened this door, and we have crossed through it for a reason." "But what reason?" Marn asked, her eyes searching the landscape, as if the answer might be hiding in the stars above or in the soil beneath their feet. Mildred looked around at the others, her gaze lingering on the faces of the villagers who had followed her into this unknown. They were all waiting for direction, for understanding, for some sign that would tell them where to go next. But what if there was no sign? What if this was the test? To step forward without the answers, without the certainty, and to create their own path forward. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Then Mildred heard it, a sound, faint at first, like a distant whisper. She turned toward it, her heart skipping a beat. It was the hum of the spiral, but it was different now. It wasn't just a pulse, it was a call. The villagers stiffened as the sound grew louder, resonating through the ground beneath them. It felt as though the earth itself was speaking, calling them forward. It was the same hum that had echoed through the well, but now it was more powerful, more urgent. It wasn't just the land, it was something else, something beyond the earth, something beyond the village, something cosmic. "We have to follow it," Mildred said, her voice steady. She had no plan, no map, no guide to show them the way, but she could feel the pull, she could feel the force urging them forward. It's the only way we can truly understand this world, understand ourselves. The villagers exchanged glances, unsure, but there was no fear in their eyes now. There was resolve. They had crossed through the threshold, and they would continue, step by step, toward whatever lay ahead. Mildred stepped forward, her feet sinking slightly into the soft ground, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her. The hum grew louder, more insistent, like a heartbeat. She raised her hand toward the stars, her fingers trembling as she reached for the infinite. "We walk the path," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "We walk the path the spiral has laid out for us." One by one, the villagers followed her, stepping forward, drawn by the same force that had pulled Mildred out, that had called to them all. The wind picked up, swirling around them as they walked, lifting the dust from the earth, carrying it with them into the night. The world stretched out before them, an unknown future waiting to be discovered. The spiral had opened the door, yes, but now it was up to them to decide what they would do with it. They could not stand still. They could not return to what they had known. The path ahead was theirs to walk. And so they walked. Together. The path stretched before them, a winding journey into the unknown, and with every step, the land seemed to shift beneath their feet. The ground pulsed with an ancient rhythm, as though the earth itself was awakening, stretching its limbs after eons of slumber. Mildred could feel it in her bones, the steady thrum of energy that vibrated through the air, around them, beneath them. It was the spiral, yes, but now it was something more. Something alive, reaching out, connecting them not just to the land, but to the very heart of the universe. The stars above were brighter now, closer, as if the night sky itself had drawn them in, wrapping them in a blanket of shimmering light. The villagers moved forward in a quiet procession, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of the spiral still pulsing beneath their feet. It was as if they had crossed some boundary, stepping beyond the limits of their understanding into a world where anything was possible. The silence that surrounded them was deep, almost reverential. Not a single word was spoken as they walked, each of them caught in the weight of the moment, in the gravity of what they were witnessing. Mildred felt the pull of the spiral in her chest, a magnetic force that guided her but also pushed her forward, urging her to remember what had been lost, what had been forgotten. The path before her was not one of certainty. There were no signs, no map to follow. It was a journey of discovery, of revelation, and that made it both thrilling and terrifying. She glanced over her shoulder at the villagers, at the faces that had once been filled with fear, uncertainty, but now, as they followed her, their expressions had shifted. There was no more fear, there was only understanding. They had chosen to walk this path, to face what lay beyond, together. The spiral had shown them the way, but it was their choice to follow it. They had been given the gift of memory, of connection to something beyond themselves, and now they had to embrace it. "We don't know where this leads," Mildred said softly, her voice breaking the silence for the first time in what felt like hours. "But we do know one thing. We are not alone. Not now. Not ever." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The villagers exchanged glances, nodding in agreement, each of them feeling the weight of the truth she had spoken. They were not alone. Not now. Not in this new world, this new beginning. They had crossed the threshold, and together, they would face whatever lay ahead. The landscape around them seemed to change as they walked, shifting with a fluidity that was almost hypnotic. The terrain beneath their feet was soft and springy, like moss or grass, and the sky above them seemed to ripple and shimmer, as though it were made of liquid light. Mildred had never seen anything like it before. It was as if they had crossed into a place beyond time, beyond the reach of any world they had known. As they continued, the air around them grew warmer, the light from the spiral growing brighter, more intense. It wasn't blinding, though. It was soft, gentle, as though the world itself was inviting them in, urging them to move forward to understand. The hum of the spiral grew louder now, lighter, a low, steady vibration that resonated through the earth and into their bones. The pulse of the spiral was everywhere, and it was connected to everything. It wasn't just a power, it was life itself. The breath of the world, the heartbeat of the universe. Mildred could feel it too. She was no longer just walking, she was becoming part of it. The land, the stars, the spiral. It was all one, interconnected, and she was a part of it now. They all were. And then, the path before them opened into something larger, something far more vast than they could have imagined. The village, small, isolated, afraid, was no longer the center of their world. Now the world stretched out before them, infinite, expanding. Mildred felt both humbled and exhilarated by the realization. This was just the beginning. The villagers came to a stop, their eyes wide as they looked out over the vast expanse before them. The ground had given way to an open expanse, a valley of sorts, stretching out in all directions. The light from the spiral reached across the landscape, illuminating what appeared to be towering mountains in the distance, their peaks lost in the clouds. There were rivers that ran like silver threads through the land, forests that stretched as far as the eye could see, and fields that seemed to pulse with life. This was the world they had come to find, the world beyond the veil, the world that had been waiting for them. But there was something else, something even more profound. In the center of the valley, just beyond the river, stood a structure, ancient, massive, and unlike anything they had ever seen. It was made of stone, but not the kind of stone they were familiar with. This was smooth, glowing with an otherworldly light. It pulsed with energy, vibrating in sync with the rhythm of the spiral. It was a doorway, a gate, a monument. The villagers were silent as they stared at it, their eyes filled with awe and fear. They had crossed into something beyond their comprehension, something ancient. Mildred could feel it now. The weight of history, the weight of time. This structure, this thing, had been here long before they had ever been born. It had stood waiting for them to come. "This is it," Marn whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the spiral. Mildred nodded, her heart racing. It's the next step. The door, the beginning of a new world. The villagers stood still, staring at the structure, unable to move, unable to speak. The magnitude of what they were witnessing was too much. But Mildred understood. She had always known this moment was coming. They had been chosen. They had been prepared for this. The spiral had led them here, and now they had to face what was waiting. Mildred stepped forward, her heart pounding, her breath steady. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew this. They had to cross the threshold. The spiral had opened the door, but it was up to them to walk through it. With a deep breath, she took the first step toward the glowing structure. The villagers followed her one by one, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The earth seemed to hum beneath their feet, the light growing brighter as they neared the monument. The door was opening, and they were ready to step into the unknown. And as they crossed the threshold, they stepped into a new world, one that had always been there, waiting for them to remember. The moment they crossed the threshold, the world as they knew it seemed to melt away. It wasn't a violent change, nor an abrupt one, but rather a slow, deliberate shift, as though the very fabric of reality was bending, unfolding, like the pages of an ancient book that had not been touched in centuries. The light from the spiral enveloped them, no longer a mere pulse beneath their feet, but a living entity, radiating warmth and promise. Mildred stepped forward first, her heart racing with anticipation and something deeper, something primal, a sense of connection that resonated in the very marrow of her bones. The air was different here, charged with energy, thick with history, but it was also strangely calming. The energy hummed softly around her, not in an invasive, overwhelming way, but like a whisper just at the edge of her consciousness, coaxing her forward. The structure in front of them, vast, ancient, glowing with that strange, smooth light, loomed larger as they drew closer. It was not a typical doorway or gate. There were no doors to open, no locks to break, just the looming presence of something that had been waiting for them for eons. Mildred could feel it. This wasn't a place of passage. It was a place of connection, a meeting point between the world they had known and the one they had yet to understand. The villagers stood behind her, their faces illuminated by the soft glow. They were still, transfixed by the structure, unsure of what to do, what to expect. The fear that had once clung to them was no longer present, but now there was something else, an awe so deep it seemed to render them mute. "We are ready," Marn whispered, her voice barely audible. "We have to be. We've come this far." Mildred nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over her like a mantle. They had come this far, yes, but what did it mean? What was waiting for them in this new world? What had the spiral led them to, and why had it opened this door for them? She could feel the answer now, deep inside her, thrumming in time with the pulse of the spiral. It was not something to be feared. It was something to be understood, something to be embraced. As she reached out her hand toward the glowing structure, the air around her shifted. The light dimmed momentarily, and then, with a soft sound like the rustling of leaves in a breeze, the structure began to respond. The surface rippled, shifting like liquid metal, and then, as if responding to an invitation, it parted before her. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but silence, the kind of silence that presses in, thick and palpable, where even the breath in your chest seems to hold its place, waiting. And then, as if the universe had exhaled, the sound returned. But it wasn't a roar or a crashing wave of noise. It was a low, resonant hum, the kind that you feel more than you hear, it reverberating deep within your bones, within your soul. Mildred stepped forward into the opening. The villagers followed her without hesitation, their steps synchronized, their resolve as firm as the earth beneath them. They passed through the threshold, and as they did, the world around them shifted again. The air became heavier, thicker, but in a way that was grounding. The landscape stretched out before them, vast and endless. There was no horizon here, no boundary to mark where one world ended and another began. Everything was connected, woven together in a tapestry of light, of energy, of time itself. And then they saw it, the thing they had been walking toward, the thing they had crossed the threshold for. It wasn't a single object or a place, but a presence, a force, a consciousness. The air hummed again, louder now, and a shape began to form before them. At first, it was only a vague outline, shifting, rippling, like smoke or mist. But then as they watched, it solidified into something more. A being, tall and ethereal, but not human. Its body was formed from light, from the very fabric of the universe itself. It had no face, no eyes to gaze into, but its presence was undeniable. It was as if it saw them, as though it knew their every thought, their every fear. Mildred's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't step back. She didn't flinch. She felt a pull toward this entity, a connection that went beyond words, beyond reason. "You have come," the being said, its voice not a sound, but a feeling that surged through them all. It was deep, resonant, like a river flowing through their minds. Mildred felt the words wrap around her like a familiar embrace. It wasn't threatening. It was welcoming. It was as if the universe itself had been waiting for them to step forward, to cross the threshold, to answer the call of the spiral. And now, they had arrived. "We have come," she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "We have come to understand." The being shifted slightly, as though considering her words. "Understanding is not a gift," it responded. "It is a process, a journey that requires more than knowledge." Mildred nodded slowly, feeling the weight of its words settle deep within her. She had always known that the journey would not be easy. The spiral had shown them the way, but now they had to walk it. Now they had to understand. "We are ready," Mildred said, her voice firm now. "We are ready to walk this path." The being seemed to consider her words again, and then it nodded, though not in the way a human would. It was more like the universe itself acknowledged her, and the hum around them grew louder, more resonant, like the sound of an orchestra tuning before the first note was played. And then the being spoke again, its voice reverberating like a cosmic drumbeat. "Then you will walk it, but remember, the spiral is not a destination. It is a journey that will shape you, that will change you. You must choose what you become." Mildred's heart pounded in her chest. This was not an easy path. It was not an easy choice. But they had come this far, and they would go further. The spiral had opened the door, but now they were the ones who would walk through it. Together, hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through the spiral. We've only just begun to unravel the mysteries of this new world, and trust me, there's so much more to come. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think of the world they've entered? What are your theories about where this path will take them? Drop your comments and theories below. We can't wait to dive into the conversation with all of you. If you're enjoying the story and want to see where the journey goes next, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. The world of the spiral is vast, and every twist and turn brings something new, just like this channel. If you're new here, welcome. We're so glad you're part of the community, and we can't wait to share even more chapters with you. That's it for today, but don't worry. The next chapter is just around the corner. Until then, keep the questions coming, and let's keep exploring together. Remember, this journey is about us all, walking the path of discovery, side by side. See you next time.